Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching.
Billy got up much earlier than usual today. There was a good reason for that. Today at school, the principal was going to present a diploma for winning the regional Olympiad. Billy has loved math since childhood, although no one has ever taught him much. When he was 6 years old, he learned to count and write letters on his own. At that time, he played for days on end with a neighbor girl, Elizabeth, who was a couple of years older than him. Billy often admired Elizabeth's primer and notebooks. Elizabeth liked it very much. She was proud that she had already gone to school and knew a lot of things. And Billy and his little sister Leslie still had a long way to go. Later, Billy went to school. He was very proud that he could read fluently and add on his fingers while his peers were just learning the letters of the alphabet. So he didn't have to spend a lot of time at home on lessons, and he had a lot of free time. Even then, he decided not to waste this time. He opened his primer and taught his little sister Leslie, who at that time was barely 4 years old. This year, Billy was already in 9th grade. When the question arose about who would go to the Math Olympiad, Lucy's teacher did not have to think long about Billy. Knowing Billy's family circumstances well, Lucy decided to take the whole process into her own hands. She paid for his trip to the regional center and back. Lucy had no doubt that Billy would live up to her expectations, and so it was. Yesterday afternoon, a message came from the district department saying that Billy had won first place and had scored the maximum number of points. Lucy congratulated Billy in front of everyone and asked everyone to call their parents tomorrow, where there would be a ceremonial presentation of awards to all the participants of the Olympiad and a tea party. Billy told his mother about it in the evening. His mother listened indifferently and went on with her work. She's tired today, but tomorrow she'll be in a good mood when the principal presents me with a diploma and her with a letter of thanks, Billy thought to himself. He finally finished styling his hair with gel, and he had shined his shoes the night before. By now, Leslie had already had time to iron his white shirt. "Thank you, sis. If I get the money with the diploma today, I'll buy you a chocolate bar," Billy said and kissed her on the forehead. "Now get ready yourself, or you'll be late because of me. And make sure you make a sandwich and eat it before you go out," he added like a caring brother. After the end of the third lesson, the teacher asked everyone to line up. Tables were already set up in the courtyard of the school, and dozens of parents were sitting there in anticipation. Lucy excitedly ran around the classrooms and urged everyone to get in line as quickly as possible. "Billy, are your parents here yet?" she asked. "Mom promised to come. Is she here yet?" Billy asked. "I haven't seen her yet," Lucy said, shrugged her shoulders, and turned away, sighing heavily. Her fellow literature teacher, Betty, was whispering in her ear. "Lucy, why traumatize the boy like that? I don't think we'll see Billy's mother or father. It'll be business as usual." "That's what I mean, and the child is a pity," Lucy said and sighed once again. The gala was declared open. The principal made a solemn speech and began to hand out certificates and gifts. Billy kept looking at his mother from the crowd. He believed that she was late and was about to come running. But his mother never showed up. The principal presented Billy with his diploma first. She praised him, called him the pride of the whole school. As Billy expected, the school administration had prepared a gift for Billy's mother, but Billy himself had to receive the gift from the principal's hands. Leslie stood in the opposite row and jumped up and down as her brother received his well-deserved awards. As soon as the lessons were over, Billy hurried home. He didn't find his mother or father at home. He was hungry, but the refrigerator at home was empty. Billy changed his clothes and prepared something to eat for the whole family. Just as he sat down at the table, the front door to the apartment opened, and he heard a familiar sobbing sound. "Leslie, is that you?" Billy asked. Leslie didn't answer and continued sobbing. Billy seemed to realize what was wrong and walked over to his little sister. As soon as she saw her brother, she immediately cried. There they are, behind our playground on the sidewalk. Billy understood without further explanation what he was talking about. He and Leslie didn't have much time. He looked at his watch and figured he had about 20 or 30 minutes to eat lunch himself and feed Leslie. Then he'd have to get his little sister and get out of the apartment right away. Okay, stop crying. I'd got it. I made some food, and it's gonna take you a while to change. So you'd better eat right away and we'll go, Billy said and ran to his room to gather all the necessary textbooks for tomorrow. He might have to spend the night at one of his friends or his grandmother's house tonight. He would deal with that later. While he was thinking about where to send Leslie and how to make sure she didn't have to spend the night tonight, in 10 minutes Billy had already packed everything he needed. Leslie had time to change her clothes and wash the dishes behind her. Then they hurried to the exit. As they left the driveway, Leslie sobbed again and pointed toward a large road where a man and a woman were engaged in a strange activity. The man would take 2 or 3 steps and fall to the ground, and the woman would try to pick him up, but she was unsuccessful. Then she'd turn to persuasion. True, you can't hear what the mother says to the drunken father from here, but the content of the conversation is clear to their children. Billy took his sister's hand and hurried to get out of sight quickly before the drunken father saw him. The mother seemed to see them and discreetly made a gesture with her hand for them to hurry. They managed to quickly hide behind the bushes in the yard and from there watch what was happening. The father fell many more times until he reached the front door of the driveway. The mother would not calm down. Harvey, come on, it's just a little bit left to go home. You're strong, you can do it. Harvey, instead of getting to his apartment faster, said something inappropriate and even tried to sing some songs. From the outside, it seemed that this man's drunkenness only concerned his woman. Drunk Harvey didn't care about anything. He was fine. Even if he falls asleep somewhere under the fence, he has a caring and loving wife, Selena, who will find him and bring him home at any cost. And it doesn't matter that this whole picture causes their children great shame in front of their friends and peers in the yard. And it doesn't matter that this kind of care Selena has been unleashing on her husband for years now. And it does not matter that the son and daughter are completely left to themselves. But despite this, they have grown up to be amazingly diligent and intelligent children. And the fact that in the future neither their diligence nor their intelligence will save their well-being never bothers their parents. Billy and Leslie spent the rest of the day in the park behind the garages playing with their friends. Evening came, by which time all of their friends were starting to go home. Billy was embarrassed to once again ask one of them for a sleepover. He was thinking more about Leslie. He had 2 options: to take her to her grandmother's house, where she wouldn't make it to her first class tomorrow, or to leave her at home, where she didn't want to go and was already sobbing. Billy, as always, hoped for the best and chose the second option. When they got home, the mother was sitting on the balcony doing her usual thing. As soon as she saw her children, she quickly took both of them by the hands, led them into the kitchen, locked the door from the inside, and began to scold them in a whisper. "Where do you go all day long? Didn't I tell you to stay home from school? The neighborhood kids played for an hour and went home, but where have you been?" Selena glared menacingly at her children one by one. That she was mean, they realized without her scolding. Selena is always angry when she has to spend a long time searching the neighborhood for her husband Harvey and then dragging him home, coaxing him nearly unconscious. The kids realized this as early as lunchtime when they got home from school. More specifically, Billy had figured it out back at school, when his mother had failed to show up for the ceremonial lineup. He had hoped that at least at home, he would be able to present a gift from the principal and show off his diploma. But the situation at home does not change from year to year. He was sure that now no diploma and no gift would help Selena to become a little kinder and more attentive to her children. While the mother was reprimanding her children, a loud, incomprehensible voice came from the parents' bedroom. It seems that tonight's scenario is now no secret to anyone. A moment later, the kitchen door opened and a swollen Harvey stood at the entrance. "Oh, there are our children. Mother, where have they been all day?" asked the drunken father. "Well, I'm busy figuring that out right now," Selena said with a tremor in her voice. "Billy, you're not living up to my expectations. It's a shame. I wanted to raise my son to be a real man, and he's growing up to be something he's not," Harvey said, walked over to the refrigerator, looked at it, and slammed the door loudly. Billy stood in the corner, trying to be as close to Leslie as possible, and mentally wondered what he was going to be guilty of today. He went over all of his father's recent accusations this month, but his father's resourcefulness was ahead of his memory this time too. "You asked for a puppy. We got you a puppy. Where is he? Animals are a responsibility. And my son's responsibility is very bad. Otherwise, Mother, how do you explain that he couldn't even tame a dog?" Harvey said, setting himself up for an interminably long conversation about a puppy from 3 years ago. Billy was offended, and once again, he couldn't stand his emotions. "Daddy, you threw that puppy out of the balcony. I wanted to save him. I would have gotten him out. You wouldn't even let me pick him up on the ground. But you're still accusing me of killing our puppy. Don't you dare cross your father." Harvey pounded on the table, and then he continued his pointless monologue. "Mother, it's your upbringing. You see, your son is still a green kid, but he dares to teach his father. Dad, I'm telling it like it is. Why do you make up trivial excuses just to scold us?" Billy squeezed out all his resentment, but his mother immediately pulled him back and pushed him to the side, making him realize that the best tactic in this case was to silently tolerate and agree with his father. "Where are all the flowers?" Leslie wanted flowers. Her mother bought some and planted them in a pot. "You don't even know how to water 3 bushes properly." Now the father transferred his senseless claims to his daughter. Leslie was already crying quietly by this point, and when the father began his onslaught, she started sobbing. But she also knows very well that she will get even more for crying. So she tried her best to keep all her emotions inside her. It was noticeable, by the way. She was almost choking on her tears, and her hands were shaking. These pointless educational conversations, as Harvey called them, lasted until midnight. The hungry, tired children had only one regret, that they had wasted a sleepover at their friend's house and had come to their own. Selena occasionally backed up her husband's nonsensical accusations and busied herself on the balcony. Both Billy and Leslie are sure that if their mother had wanted to end this publicanization, she would have done so long ago. They all their conscious life cannot understand why the mother allows the drunken father constantly morally abuse their children and torment them with completely empty reproaches. There is still a childish naivety in them, thanks to which they both do not lose hope that someday Selena will stand up for their defense and all this nightmare will end. But Billy is 16 years old and Leslie is 13 years old, and they can't wait for that moment. 2 years have passed and Billy's graduation day is approaching. He is waiting for this day with excitement because he is graduating with a gold medal. Of course, at this celebration, he wants to see his parents, their pride and joy for their son. This time, Billy is sure that his father will definitely be happy about this achievement of his son, and everything will go differently. Finally, the day has come. Billy beautifully styled his hair with gel. Selena put on her best dress. Before the graduation, the father of the family did not drink for 3 days and was ready to participate in an important family event. The awarding of the gold medal was the key event of this celebration. At this moment, some were envious of the medalist Billy, some were genuinely happy. Harvey was happy too. It was noticeable by the fact that he was already drunk by the time the ceremonial part of the event began. The younger students showed their musical numbers, singing and dancing. Parents sat in the hall right behind the teachers. At the next performance of the younger pupils, one of the adults came on stage and started dancing with them. The hall immediately burst into laughter. Billy turned his head and could not believe his eyes. Harvey had once again surpassed his expectations and was dancing on the stage among the school children. He got up from his seat and ran to his mother, who only shrugged her shoulders and tried to calm her son down. Billy was ashamed of his father's behavior. The whole hall laughs at him, and he continues to dance in a drunken frenzy. After a while, Billy went up to his mother and said, "Mom, take your father home before he does something else. I tried, he won't. He wants to thank your teachers for you. We'll sit for a while and then we'll go," said Selena. Billy was now at peace. Dancing on stage wasn't all his father's talent. He might do something else before the end of the event. This isn't a restaurant where alumni and parents can let their emotions run wild. While everyone is still in school, the events are strictly supervised by the principal and all the teachers. No one is supposed to behave freely in this place. But Harvey doesn't seem to care about such rules. In the middle of the event, the students performed a white swan dance. The children twirled around in white outfits with wings on their backs. At this point, the audience in the auditorium became animated again. Harvey was creative again and literally dragged the literature teacher Betty to the white dance by force. She resented and resisted as much as she could, but Harvey was not going to back down. He forcefully dragged the teacher right to the center of the stage and began to twirl her in a white dance. Betty hid her face in shame in front of the students. Billy covered his eyes with his hands and wished he could fall under the ground right now and not come out until all this shame was over and erased from people's minds. Selena seemed to notice her son's embarrassment and headed for the stage as well. As she jostled with the dancing children, she tried to explain something to her husband and get him off the stage, but he roughly pushed her away. She fell right on the stage. Billy couldn't take it anymore and ran to his mother's aid. The school principal also ran to help. Thus, an innocent children's dance turned into one family's desperate struggle with the participation of educators. The school principal tried to explain to Harvey that it is not appropriate for a parent to behave like this in front of the children, but in response she heard foul language. In the end, no one was able to reach an agreement with the drunken Harvey. He struggled to return to his seat in the audience, but continued to demand that the festivities continue. The brightest day that Billy had waited for all year became the worst day for him. For the rest of the event, Harvey took turns approaching the teachers, bragging about how he had raised such a smart son, hugging and kissing them. After the event was over, Harvey was no longer able to understand words or stand on his own 2 feet. He was taken out of the school auditorium with great difficulty, but he sat down in the yard near the main entrance and continued to talk incoherent nonsense. Next to him, as always, was Selena, so helpless and so driven by her husband's inadequate behavior. Billy watched what was happening from the window of his classroom and made a plan on how to escape unnoticed from the company of his classmates, who were going to move on to the celebration of their holiday. At that moment, his teacher Lucy entered the classroom. She immediately turned to Billy. "Billy, come with me," she said in a commanding tone. She usually called Billy by his first name, so this familiarity did not surprise Billy now. After all the teachers were now angry about his parents' behavior. Lucy led him to the principal's office. When he entered the principal's office, he saw that almost all of his teachers were sitting at the desk. Billy couldn't raise his eyes and face them out of shame. He stepped over the threshold into the office and stood guiltily in the corner where the closet stood. "Billy," the school principal addressed him. Billy continued to stand silent and stare at the floor. "Billy, from the very first days that you stepped into this school, you have been a diligent student. You mastered all subjects well and never upset your teachers with your behavior. Today's gold medal is your well-deserved achievement. We want to congratulate you once again on this success, and we are sure that in the future you will become an excellent specialist, and what is important, a man with a capital letter." The principal said these words, and the seated teachers joined them. It seemed that the principal wanted to say something else, but then she stammered a little and handed the speech to Betty. Betty stood up and said, "Billy, you stand on the threshold of adulthood like all of your peers. We would like you to enter this adulthood with confidence. Perhaps some of the events of today upset you a lot, but you must understand that children are not responsible for the actions and behavior of their parents. We always knew that you had to overcome some difficulties in your family. Even as a child, you coped with these trials with dignity and managed to show yourself only from the best side. So, let today's event not overshadow your joy today. You should think about your future and let it be beautiful," said Betty. Billy was touched to the core. He expected the teachers to be upset with his parents' behavior, but instead they made it clear that they understood him. This act of support really had a positive effect on Billy. But the shame of having such people as his parents and knowing about their behavior, even the teachers knew about it, constantly gnawed at Billy's soul. The gold medal gave Billy the right to enter any prestigious educational institution without any obstacles. From childhood, he dreamed of becoming a financier, so he had no problems with the choice of profession. He successfully passed all the last exams and began to slowly get ready to go to the city. His father, of course, insisted that Billy should study at the engineering high school in their town. His mother, as always, had no opinion on the matter, but Billy realized that his place was in one of the most prestigious universities in the capital. Therefore, he did not emphasize his parents' position. Only he was madly worried about Leslie. How would she now cope with the familiar reality without her brother's support? She had practically grown up in Billy's arms, and at school, he had always looked out for her. Leslie realized that too, but she tried to pretend that she could manage on her own. The day Billy left, Leslie walked him to the bus station. They drove in silence. Billy saw Leslie wiping tears from her face with the corner of his eye. When daddy's drunk or mommy's mad at you, you don't have to be afraid, and you don't have to put up with their attacks. Just get your stuff and go to grandma's. I told her everything again, even though she already knows everything. You're older now, you're more visible. Take care of yourself, and try not to spend the night at your friends' or girlfriends' houses. You'll be safer at grandma's, Billy said. Leslie continued to sob and was no longer hiding her tears. Both know that Leslie is pretty much on her own now. Grandma, though she knows about her son's family's problems, can't help much. Billy and Leslie intuitively guessed that only Mom can solve this problem. But Selena had never had a strong character to protect the children and put her husband in his place, and there was not even a hint of it. The only idea that lived in her was that she loved her Harvey and intended to continue to serve him at all costs. She doesn't realize that she has power over this weak man, and that if she tries hard enough, she can stop this ugly lifestyle where she follows his every move and listens to his delusions. Even after almost 20 years of living together and the same duration of his drinking, Selena has not realized that it is useless to fall for the words and behavior of a drinking man. She persists in persuading her drunken husband not to swear in the street, to find the strength to somehow get home, not to get angry and hear her. She spends all her energy on this. She ends up feeling completely devastated. Inside herself, she left nothing for her children. All her care, warmth and tenderness was given to her husband, who didn't really need it all. That is why Leslie and Billy remember about their mother only her anger and nagging on every occasion. They are both not used to counting on her support and understanding. If Billy benefited from it, as he grew up a strong man, but for Leslie it turned out to be a tragedy. But while no one knows about it, Leslie is still just a teenager. Gather all your strength in your fist and be patient for just 3 years. I'll get a job as soon as I get into town. As soon as you graduate, you can go to school. If there's anything you need, write to me. I'll give you my address. And please be strong, Billy said and kissed his sister on the forehead goodbye. As soon as he arrived in the city, Billy applied to one of the prestigious universities. He was gladly accepted. He would study at the expense of the budget, and for the first time he could live in a dormitory. Having solved all these questions in a few days, Billy decided not to waste time and found a job at the nearest supermarket. He would be able to get his first paycheck before the school year started. He had already divided it. Half of it he would give to his mother to buy everything Leslie needed, and the other half he would leave for his own expenses. But the hardest part was Leslie. In the absence of her brother, she tried to find support from her mother. But Leslie suddenly found that her mother was like a stranger to her. There was no warmth between them, no attraction. This made her even more depressed. She remembers recently dreaming of having the same close relationship with her mother as all her friends. She compared her life to that of her friend Elizabeth. Elizabeth can tell her mother everything. She can even ask her to buy something and she does. They can even joke with their mom and their mom laughs. Elizabeth's mom is aware of all her secrets, and when she needs it, she gets support from her. Also, Elizabeth's mom often makes compliments, from which Elizabeth instantly blossoms, and Leslie sadly lowers her eyes and sighs quietly. All of Leslie's attempts have been to little avail. Mom was ready to communicate with her daughter only on domestic topics, and that, when Leslie tried to give her childish support, Selena was annoyed and quickly transferred the topic of conversation. This was a new blow to Leslie's growing up psyche. Her grades deteriorated. No matter how much she remembered her brother's advice and tried to study hard, it was as if her brain was completely disobeying her. Her attention was constantly scattered and drifting off into the distance. In her childish naivete, she decided to talk to her mother about it. "Mom, for some reason it's getting hard for me to understand the lessons. I read everything, but I can't understand anything. What should I do?" Leslie asked. "Then you're not reading carefully. When you read, you have to think about what you're reading. And your thoughts are somewhere out there, flying in the clouds. What, you're thinking about boys already?" Selena cut her off harshly. Leslie's still childish psyche took these words as another insult. Yes, there is a boy she likes, but Leslie is absolutely sure that he will never pay attention to her, and she wouldn't even think about socializing or dating him. She was really concerned about her grades, but her mom, instead of helping her daughter, had driven her deeper into a dead end. Added to Leslie's depressed state were feelings of shame and guilt. However, Selena was not much different from many mothers. Not every mother realizes that a growing daughter is still her child, and a child in her teens needs the attention of her adult loved ones even more. And this need for attention is much greater than even in infancy. But for some reason, most women who become mothers of daughters as if completely forget that they themselves come from adolescence. After a series of these conversations, Leslie felt a deep despair. She was filled with great fear. If she didn't do well in her studies, her final grades would be bad. With those grades, she'd never get in. And if she doesn't get in, she'll end up living with her parents for the rest of her life. After a few more days, Leslie found out that she absolutely did not want to see her peers and school in general. Now she has a new habit, leaving the house early in the morning, but not going to school. She would go anywhere just to pass the time. She started breaking up with her friends. She didn't even want to go to her grandmother's house. But Grandma turned out to be a little wiser than her mother, although the grandmother did not know what depression in teenagers is. But she immediately noticed the changes in her granddaughter's behavior. "If you want, you can always come to my house, but you can't skip school. If your father finds out about it, you'll be in trouble again," Grandma said. "But I still don't have the strength to study, Grandma. I don't understand anything. I can't learn anything. If I go to school like this, I'll only get more F's. I'd rather not be there at all than get D's and embarrass Billy," Leslie said. staring blankly out the window. Grandmother realized from her granddaughter's downcast look that her frustration was serious. She allowed Leslie to stay with her for a few days, and she told her wayward son Harvey and wimpy daughter-in-law Selena that she needed Leslie for housework. They didn't object. Leslie spent all day long lying staring at the ceiling. She refused to eat, slept badly at night, and often woke up with nightmares. Her grandmother was concerned about her condition, but people of her generation were not familiar with such solutions as antidepressants or psychologists' services. So she patiently continued to persuade her granddaughter to return to her old life. A couple days later, her friend Elizabeth came to Leslie's house. She asked her grandmother's permission if she could go to the movies with Leslie after lunch. Grandma even got excited. Maybe that way Leslie could finally get out of this state. But Leslie was very indifferent to her friend's suggestion. When her grandmother and Elizabeth began to persuade her to go to the movies with her friend, then she burst out with emotions. "So tell me, Grandma, that you're sick of me too. I know that no one has ever needed me. Why do I need this kind of life? I'd rather die than live like this." Leslie was really hysterical. Elizabeth left her bewildered. Grandmother thought that Leslie was showing her forming character in this way. All in father went, she thought, and did not give importance to the words of her granddaughter. That same night in the morning, Grandma heard Leslie leave her room and go into the bathroom. Once again, Grandma didn't pay much attention to this little thing. She decided to get another hour of sleep, since she planned to take Leslie to the store in the morning to get something. Maybe it would distract her and put her in a better mood. Waking up, Grandma decided to wake Leslie up and have breakfast together. When she opened the bedroom door, she didn't see her granddaughter there. Maybe she'd gone to school after all, or gone home to her parents. She thought she should call and find out. Then she headed for the bathroom. When she opened the door, Grandma almost fainted at what she saw. Leslie was sitting on the floor and making sobbing noises. Grandma walked over and lifted her head. Phone and she dialed. Neither Selena nor Harvey picked up. A couple of hours after her hospitalization, the doctor informed Grandma that Leslie had gotten drunk on pills and wanted to quietly pass away. The grandmother clutched at her heart. The doctor advised her to immediately see a specialist, such as a psychologist. The grandmother, of course, did not understand what this specialist does and how to find him. The doctor also asked about Leslie's parents. When the grandmother told him that the father was a drunkard and the mother was voluntarily completely at his mercy, leaving not a single drop of energy for her children, the doctor shook his head. It became clear to him that the problem with his family was not just the drinking father, it was much deeper than that. Leslie had come to her senses and was now begging her grandmother not to tell her parents all this. She realized that in the next few days her father would get drunk again, and she would get a lot of unpleasant words. If her mother found out, she would be even more furious at her daughter's antics. The child was absolutely certain that nothing could change her parents. The grandmother knew her son and her daughter-in-law too well, so she went along with Leslie and agreed not to tell her parents anything about it. They weren't particularly interested. Selena was calm that Leslie was at her grandmother's house and she would take care of her. In 2 days, Leslie was ready to be discharged. The doctor realized that the grandmother alone could not do much about her granddaughter's depression. That's why he brought his colleague psychotherapist himself and asked him to prescribe the right pills. Already after a week, Leslie began to gradually come to her senses. She felt that she missed her friends and her parents too. Her grandmother took her to the store and bought some beautiful dresses. After saying a warm goodbye to her grandmother and apologizing for her emotional act, Leslie returned home again. As hard as it was for her, the close contact with her own death had changed her a lot. She became stronger. Her maturation process has accelerated. Now she's determined to do whatever it takes to finish school and help her brother. And then there's a new life. What kind of life? I don't care what it is, as long as I don't have to see that drunken face and that angry and unhappy mother running around. A person, no matter how much he wants the most beautiful conditions for himself, in fact, can also perfectly adapt to everything bad. Therefore, Selene did not realize that she and her husband had long ago become hostages to the dark sides of each other's souls. Usually in a dark space, a person is not able to notice that there is a way out somewhere. So the next 8 years passed unnoticed. No fundamental changes in the life of Harvey and Selena did not happen, except for the fact that Selena is increasingly ill and sometimes cannot get out of bed for weeks. Leslie had long ago left for the city, went wherever she wanted to go, and finished her studies quite successfully. Then she got a job, and then she got a promotion. In that time alone, she had managed to get married and divorced twice. Billy had been working since the first days of his arrival in town and had never known a day's rest. He successfully combined work with his studies. By the time he graduated, he had already made a name for himself in a private company. He made a brilliant career and achieved a certain financial stability. When he met Julia on his way, Billy had no doubt that this girl was his destiny. Therefore, he did not bother to think for a long time, and they modestly married after 3 months of acquaintance. By the time their eldest son Tom was born, they had their own spacious apartment. Billy never hid from Julia that he was always worried about his parents, especially his mother. Therefore, when he proposed to go to his parents with little Tom, she agreed with joy. By the time Billy arrived, Mom was in bed. Harvey was now allowed to get drunk and lie under every fence without any restrictions. Even though Selena was no longer able to run after him and drag him home all the time, she still continued to worry more about her husband than herself. Billy used to come to the family home every year too. But this time, for the first time, he noticed that his mother had aged noticeably. His father was as healthy as ever, so he didn't think of changing his lifestyle. He's doing just fine. After staying a couple of days, Billy made an important offer to his parents. He would take them to his house. His father would go to a drug treatment center. His mother would be seen by the best doctors and put on her feet. During this time, Billy promised to make repairs in the apartment. After full recovery, if the parents want to return to their house, they can do so. Selena, as before, was not able to make her own decisions, and so she watched her husband's reaction. Harvey, of course, wasn't going to change anything in his life. Besides, he was against Billy taking Selena to the city. He wasn't even convinced by his wife's serious condition. What are those doctors gonna do for her? They'll prescribe all sorts of chemicals, and it's a waste of money. Harvey still underestimated the danger to Selena's life. Billy and Julia had to spend several days of futile persuasion. When they both realized that reasonable arguments were not working on Harvey, they decided to leave him to his own devices. But Billy could not leave his sick mother without proper care and support. The next day, Julia packed her mother-in-law's things and they set out on their journey. When they arrived in town, Billy immediately took his mother to the doctor. The tests revealed a whole bunch of chronic diseases. Billy decided that with such diagnoses, he could not send his mother back home, where she would once again spend all her energy and strength on completely useless care for his father. After being discharged from the hospital, Julia took full responsibility for Selena's care. Not a month later, Harvey's neighbors started calling Billy and Selena. They complained that Harvey was bringing in personal drunks to the apartment, or debauchery in the yard, or fights with one of the neighbors. Eventually, the police took him away. Billy decided not to interfere with his father's choices, but Selena couldn't get over the news. God willing, I'll get better and go home right away. My Harvey's probably waiting for me. It'll be cold soon. God forbid he should fall asleep under a fence and ruin his health, Selena repeated day and night. Mom, Dad's a grown man. If he drinks and falls asleep under the fence, he should feel all the consequences of such a lifestyle. But for now, in your 30-plus years of life, You've never let him feel the full extent of his downfall. That's why it never once occurred to him to stop drinking. So you've lost your own health, and he doesn't give a damn. You still can't understand that a person's way of life is his choice, and everyone has to take responsibility for his choice, Billy said. But for Selena, these words were unconvincing. As soon as she got a little stronger, she immediately began to insist that Billy send her home. She was not even stopped by her small and affectionate grandson Tom, who had already grown very fond of his grandmother. Not even Leslie, who had recently divorced her drunken second husband and was still in dire need of a mother's support and understanding, could stop her. Billy had to let his mother go home again, but his heart was restless for her. He decided that he would make a surprise visit to his parents' home in a couple of months and see if anything had changed in his parents' lifestyle. Before he left, he stopped by his neighbor Aubrey's house with a small gift, told her briefly about what was going on in their family, and asked her to keep an eye on Selena. Not half a month later, Aubrey called to say that Selena had suffered a seizure and had been taken to the hospital. At that moment, Leslie was visiting Billy and Julia. After hearing the unpleasant news, she decided to go to her parents' house with her brother. When they arrived, her mother was in the hospital, and Harvey was enjoying his free life as usual with obscure companions on the street. The doctor reported that Selena's illness was progressing. She needed good care after treatment. This time, Billy was determined to take his mother back to his house and not let her back in under any circumstances. He again offered his father to come with them, but as usual, he didn't see the need for it. Besides, he still didn't think Selena needed to go anywhere either. The protracted family arguments turned into an emotional showdown. The stubbornness of parents first of all upset Leslie. The final straw was her father's words when he told them the following: "If you're so worried about your mother, then one of you stay by her side and take care of her. And for a long time, no one cooks hot meals for me, no one to run to the store for kefir in the morning. That'll come in handy," he said. "Dad, Mom's done nothing but run after you all her life. You could at least respect her health by going with her. We don't hope that you'll finally get your mind right and go to a drug counselor," Leslie said. "Why would I want to see a drug counselor? They're the ones that all the drunks go to. I know my norm. When I need to, I can stop drinking without problems. And now times are hard. Your mother is sick. It's hard for me to see all this. I find peace only in a shot," said Harvey, and again reached into the refrigerator for a bottle. "Dad, are you serious? You seriously could stop drinking at any time, but you don't do it for our entire conscious life. Mom ruined her health because of you. You're the reason she didn't have the energy for us when we were kids. It's because of you that she ruined her health," Leslie told me. "And you do not interfere in our relationship with my mother. You should have brought up your own children and your husband. Instead, you jump from one man to another." Father ruthlessly pressed on Leslie's sore spot. By the way, Leslie's first love, Arthur, turned out to be an inveterate gambler. She for a long time could not find the strength to divorce him until Billy intervened. After a while, Leslie met Tony, who turned out to be a very delicate and gentle young man. But a couple of months after the wedding, it turned out that he has a terrible addiction to alcoholic beverages. Leslie once again found herself being held hostage like her mother. This time she fell back into a terrible depression, just as she had in her teens. By this time, Leslie already knew her tendency to depression and was terribly afraid of it. She had already read that through depression, a person's soul wants to tell them that they are on the wrong path. Leslie pulled herself together and realized that living with an alcoholic was clearly not what she wanted to spend her life on. Regardless, she filed for divorce from Tony. Billy and Julia supported her in this, as they knew this fate all too well. And now Leslie is already scared to start a new relationship. She is not sure that she will be able to choose a normal person without any heavy addictions. That's why she goes to a psychologist, and the psychologist pointed out the roots of her problems. In Leslie's inner world, there is no image of a happy family. She has an idea about the sacrifice of a woman and the boundless selfishness of a man. That's why she creates exactly this kind of relationship again and again. And now her father, who is the protagonist of her such fate, dares to accuse her of this. Leslie decided not to miss the opportunity and speak out everything she has failed to do in her entire life. In fact, it's because of you and my mother that my personal life doesn't work out. You're the ones who failed to instill in us the image of a happy family. What I got from you was a knack for getting into ugly situations. Now don't you dare blame me for that. It's really on your conscience, Leslie said and cried. Of course, Harvey thought it was all nonsense. In the end, Billy and Leslie decided to take Selena back to their house, leaving her father to his own devices, his old way of life. Upon arriving in town, Selena quickly went on the mend. Julia cared for her as if she were her own mother, but the doctor warned that the improvement might be temporary. By this point, Julia had given birth to their second son, who they named Mickey. Their oldest son, Tom, had already gone to school. Selena often calls her husband in Billy and Julia's absence. She wouldn't mind going away again, but the children won't let her go. He'd be lost without me. He's old. He's not in good health. If something happens to him, there's no one around, Selena sobs sometimes. Mom, you've given him your whole life. You've given him more care and attention than you ever gave Leslie and me. And what do you get in return? You think he's gonna give you a peaceful old age. You want to pick him up in the neighbors' yards and carry him home to his grave. Lily says to her, don't say that about him. Whatever he is, he's your father. He's actually a very good man. Only he's got a lot of heartache in him. His mother, your grandmother, never got on well with him. She always hurt him and thought he was nothing. Your father, as a well-mannered man, absorbed it all. He couldn't rest, so he sought solace in the bottle, and Selena continued to defend her husband. About these words, Billy agrees with his mother. He has been talking to different experts about the causes and effects of alcoholism for a long time. They tell him that alcohol addiction develops in those who do not know how to express their emotions when sober. Instead of growing up and learning to control their mental trauma, they prefer to flood it with alcohol and continue to nurture it. Also, experts said that alcoholics maintain such a life, helped by their female loved ones. In particular, it is either a mother or a wife. In Harvey's case, he was helped by both women, his mother and his wife. In order for an alcoholic to stop drinking, he must get out of this cycle and feel the consequences of his bad habit. In the end, Selena persuaded Billy to just go to his father and visit him. She promised that she wouldn't stay with him and would come back. When Billy and Selena arrived home, a complete stranger opened the door. "Who are you here to see?" a young woman with a baby in her arms asked. In the meantime, Billy could see that the apartment was nicely renovated and smelled cozy. A television was playing loudly in one of the rooms, and a man was talking loudly on the phone. For a moment, Billy thought he had gotten the address wrong. Actually, he hadn't gotten anything wrong. "Where's Harvey, the owner of this apartment?" Billy asked. "Oh, you mean the former owners of this apartment? They moved out a long time ago. We bought this apartment," the young woman said. "What do you mean you bought it? How could you buy it without my consent?" Selena asked. "We bought it from the bank, and they told us that the owners had mortgaged the apartment and had defaulted on the loan." Now Billy realized that his father had actually mortgaged the apartment, taken the money, and disappeared. And there was no way to get the apartment back. Only Selena was inconsolable. She spent the whole day making Billy walk around the usual courtyards, where Harvey could sit with his companions and drink alcohol. But nowhere of the usual habitats could they find him. So they went to the police station, but he wasn't getting there either. They even checked the city morgue, no sign of him there either. So Harvey is alive, with money and no special problems. Hardly calming his mother, Billy took her back to his place in town. As time passed, there was no word from Harvey. As the time counted down the years, Billy realized that he needed to rid his mother of her empty hopes. He managed to convince her that Harvey was most likely not alive and that they should hold a formal funeral wake and let him go. By then, Selena herself was tired of waiting, so she agreed without much difficulty. After that, indeed, her life became easier afterward. She learned to enjoy life, pay attention to her grandchildren, and put her health first. Julia still took excellent care of her mother-in-law. They even managed a couple of times to go on a joint vacation with their children and improve their health. Recently, Selena started going to church a lot. At least she told her children so. The children were not against it. On the contrary, supported her in it. Thankfully, the church was not far from home. One morning, Selena got ready to go to church again. A few minutes after she left, Julia realized she needed to go to the store. She picked up a large cart of groceries at the store and stood in line at the checkout looking out the window. Suddenly, she saw her mother-in-law walking by the store. Julia was surprised, for she had said she was going to church. But the church was just the other way around. Julia was curious. She paid at the store, went out and decided to follow her mother-in-law cautiously. At the nearest stop, her mother-in-law got into a cab and headed off in an unknown direction. Julia took a second cab and followed her. Stuck in traffic and circling the city, the cab arrived at the outskirts of the city. You could say that these places are considered slums. There are old houses, garbage everywhere, and heating pipes behind them. Selena let the cab go and went straight to the heating pipes. Julia kept up with her, but didn't catch her eye. Passing through the narrow yards, Selena came to a group of homeless people sitting near the heat pipe around a fire. It was the perfect place for the homeless to safely survive the winter. But why had Selena come here across town? Julia decided to creep closer. What was her surprise when she found a painfully familiar face in the company of the homeless? It was Harvey. She and Selena greeted each other warmly, sat down with them, laid out their gifts on a table of old crates, and talked animatedly with them. Now Julia realized that her mother-in-law probably didn't go to church. She had somehow found her beloved husband, who had taken a considerable sum of money from the bank and was wandering around freely. Apparently, she was afraid of Billy and Leslie's anger, so she didn't tell them anything about it. Julia thought long and hard about whether or not to tell Billy. In the end, she decided that it would be better if Billy saw it for himself. Once again, when Selena announced that she was going to church tomorrow, Julia and Billy decided to watch her. And once again, they were convinced that indeed Selena was going to visit Harvey's slum heater. That evening, Billy decided to talk to his mother about it. Selena denied it at first, convincing her son that he had obviously mistaken someone for her. "Mom, it's absurd. How could I confuse my own parents with someone else? I saw with my own eyes that it was you, and you went to meet your father. And he's probably making friends with the homeless and hanging out by the heating duct. Why didn't you tell us this before?" Billy asked. "I know you and Leslie don't like him. I didn't want to upset you, but I can't leave him. I'm worried about him. What if something happens to him on the street?" said Selena with a guilty look. "Mom, we never said we didn't love our father. Leslie and I have been hurt all our lives that he couldn't show his love for us when we needed it so badly. Come on, that's all in the past. We're adults now, and we have to act like adults. Let's go over there together and take him home. There's plenty of room for everyone, but you won't have to run to the other side of town, and your father will be warm," said Billy. It was a surprise to Selena. Of course, she was glad. That same afternoon in the evening, she and Billy headed over to the warming station to take Harvey in to see him. Admittedly, he had changed a lot over the years. For one thing, he had aged considerably. Street life had taken its toll on him. Instead of a well-fed man, Billy saw a shrunken and gaunt older man in front of him. Billy wanted to hug him, but Harvey was a little embarrassed and pulled back. The acrid odor of dirt immediately hit his nose. At home, he was sent straight to the bathroom. While he washed there, Billy took all of his belongings out of the apartment and threw them in the trash. Washed, trimmed, and dressed in clean clothes, Harvey finally felt like a man too. A couple days later, Billy sat his father across from him and again suggested that he see a drug counselor. Of course, his father still didn't think he was an alcoholic and promised that he wouldn't drink now. Billy decided to give him that chance and wait a while. Leslie during this period was again going through a breakup with a new young man. Their relationship had lasted about 2 years. Leslie insisted on getting married, and the young man kept taking his time. Billy and Julia advised not to hurry with marriage, and better to look more closely at this young man. Leslie did so. She only had to watch him closely for a couple of weeks to find out that in fact the young man is already married, and he is just deceiving her. She is again on the verge of depression, but already by experience knows how to cope with this state. True, she now has a strong conviction that all her failed relationships are to blame for her childhood traumas. No matter how many psychologists she goes to, there are no practical results. For a while it seems that she has learned not to accept neglect, but as soon as she enters into a relationship, she immediately turns into an obsequious girl who is ready to tolerate everything for the sake of a man. As much as she was bitter to realize it, but in this she followed her mother. Therefore, she rarely visited her parents and tried to spend more time at work. Her parents remind her of her failed relationships, and she's had quite a few. One day, Julia stated to Billy that she couldn't find her gold jewelry in the apartment. Billy didn't pay much attention to these words. He thought it was typical female inattention. Most likely, she had put her jewelry somewhere and couldn't remember. Sometime later, Billy's expensive watch disappeared from the apartment. Now he's lost his peace. He only takes it off occasionally when he's at home. He told Julia about it. She only shrugged her shoulders in response. Billy's summer vacation was approaching. He had been working for years without a vacation, so this year he could finally relax with his family. He and Julia had planned an overseas trip, with Selena and Harvey staying in charge at home. The vacation went off without a hitch. Millie and Julia, along with their children, returned tanned and refreshed. But at home, a strange mystery was waiting for them again. This time, several things were missing from the house. They were an expensive souvenir vase that Billy's business partners had given them for their wedding, a rare painting, and Billy's branded commemorative pen. Billy asked his parents if anyone had come to the house while they were gone. Turns out, no strangers had ever set foot in the house. But Billy didn't like this series of mystery stories. He thought maybe some strange thieves had climbed in through the balcony. Just in case, he decided to install security cameras at home. The next time Julia's branded handbag went missing, it wasn't hard to spot the thief. It was Harvey. Billy realized that no amount of educational talk would fix an elderly addict. Apparently, the money Billy gave his father for pocket money did not allow him to buy the necessary amount of alcohol. Billy thought about it, consulted with knowledgeable people, and made a decision. Most likely, this decision will be taken by his parents in a huff. As always, Selena will stand up for her husband and protect him. Billy certainly loves and respects his father, and he loves his mother no less. Therefore, he wishes that at least in old age, they lived normally, not playing the big kid and his eternal sacrifice. In order not to embarrass his father in front of his grandchildren, Billy decided to organize this conversation outside the house. He invited his parents to a restaurant. Billy was going to have a non-alcoholic dinner, but Harvey showed up already tipsy. He spent the rest of the evening asking for and demanding more drinks. "Daddy, you have to know that we love you very much, that your mother loves you, but you should hear us. You deserve to live the rest of your life with dignity. To do that, you need to get rid of your alcohol addiction." Billy started the conversation. Here we go. I know what I have to do. I don't have any addiction. It's how I calm my nerves. A couple of shots with a good appetizer, and my mood is normal. And you want to deprive me of this little joy of life? Harvey insisted. All drinkers think that, but they don't realize how far they've gone in their self-deception. Don't try to fool yourself, father. You think your drinking habits won't hurt anyone. Let's face it, Mom's been chasing you around and dragging you around all your life. You've drunk the apartment. You've slipped into homelessness, not to mention what you put us through as kids. It's got to end sometime, Billy said firmly. That's all I need, for you to make some more claims on me. I didn't drink the apartment. I wanted to do business, so I took money from the bank. So I lost money. Who cares? Stop talking about it. Harvey doesn't seem to realize what he's doing. All right, let's not talk about the past. Then we can talk about the present. 3 months ago, Julia's gold jewelry went missing. Then my watch went missing. When we came back from vacation, we noticed something missing from the house again. I had to install a security camera in the house. I thought until the last minute that maybe someone else had come to the house. But that's not what the camera showed, Billy said and looked his father in the eye. Selena realized that a big scandal was brewing, and it made her quickly assume her usual image of her husband's savior. Billy, what are you saying? Are you accusing Dad of stealing? Maybe he needed the money? He's a man, and a man should always have money. In your absence, maybe he didn't want to bother you with these questions. You could have been understanding, Selena said. Mother, when will you finally realize that you are not a mother to your husband, and he is not a child, but about 50 years old like an adult who should be aware of his actions and deeds? You are depriving him of that opportunity. That in this way you are taking care of him, but really you are nurturing his demons. Realize that you will be much better off if he comes to his senses and becomes a self-sufficient person. For that to happen, he needs to start thinking on his feet. And so you've spent your whole life sober, and you still can't realize it, Billy said. So what do you suggest? Harvey asked when all other arguments were over. I've already arranged with a good drug treatment clinic where my friend works as a doctor. We'll go there tomorrow and leave you there. You will receive a full course of treatment for alcohol addiction. The best doctors will work with you. There will be psychotherapy. You'll come out a new man. All you have to do is agree to it. And yes, your mother will not visit you during the treatment. Also, be prepared that after the treatment your relationship will be different. You will build it anew and in a different way. Adjust to that, Billy said. Harvey seemed to be thinking about something. He said that he would be gone for a while. When he left, Selena began her conversation again. Billy, you should be nicer to your father. I've told you all along that he's hurting, but he's actually a very good man. He just can't act the way he wants to when he's sober. When he has a few drinks, he relaxes, and that's the only way he can open up. I've heard that people who quit drinking end up stale and unhappy. So I want him to think about his health too. Selena continued to defend him. Mom, it's much harder for you to explain the truth than it is for your father. I'm telling you again that by pitying him, you're pushing him to drink. It's hard for you to understand because you hide it all under your care and custody. Please open your eyes and try to see him as an adult who can be there for you, even if you don't save him from his misery, Billy said. The very next day, Billy packed everything he needed for Harvey and took him to a drug treatment center across town. They were met by Billy's longtime friend Arthur. He is listed here as one of the best doctors. After all the formalities were formalized, Arthur invited Billy into his office. Don't worry about your father. We'll get him out of his addiction in no time. Only you need to be prepared to completely change his attitude towards him. In particular, this applies to closed women. They should think more about themselves and show less maternal care to an adult. Everyone around the former alcoholic must become self-sufficient people. Only when the adult is left to his own devices Will he gradually begin to understand his responsibility? Dr. Arthur said. That's the thing, it's hard for my mom to let him go. Even when we were little, she chose adult care over little kids. I personally doubt she can change, but let's see. If you need anything, call me, Billy said lastly. While Harvey was undergoing treatment, Selena was bored alone. Julia suggested that she contact her friends and invite them on a trip that Billy could pay for. But it turned out that she didn't have any friends. So Selena decided to go to Leslie's house and live with her for a while. She was always resenting her mother for not paying attention to her. Now it was time to have a heart-to-heart talk and make up for lost time. Leslie gladly accepted the decision. That same evening, she took her mother to her house. After a series of failures, Leslie decided to take a break in her zeal to build a new relationship and is now fully committed to work. She is an architect by profession. Recently, on the advice of her brother, she opened her own small company and is actively engaged in its promotion. When Leslie was at work, her mother opened the refrigerator door and found that there was almost nothing edible in there. A couple of bottles with incomprehensible mixtures, a lot of greens, and different spices. Selena decided to really show some motherly concern. She went to the nearest supermarket and bought a lot of different foods. In the evening, a puffy pie with filling and homemade dumplings were ready for Leslie's arrival. Selena hoped that she and her daughter would have dinner together and have heart-to-heart conversations. She had spent the entire day picking up warm words she had never said to her daughter. Let her finally feel loved, she thought. In the evening, looking at the table set, Leslie gave it some thought and declared, "Mom, you go ahead and eat and don't mind me. I prefer a little different food," she said, and started to prepare dinner for herself. By dinner, Leslie meant a couple slices of dark bread, a big mound of chopped vegetables and herbs, drizzled with olive oil. That was it. Selena was horrified by the whole thing. What kind of food is this? Daughter, you must have seen all those skinny girls who are always dieting and eating nothing but grass. You don't need to lose weight. You already have a great figure. You'd better eat some dumplings, a piece of pie, and in the morning I'll make you some pancakes, Selena said. Mom, what does my figure have to do with it? I have a rare disease that manifests itself as an intolerance to anything containing white flour and dairy products. You just didn't know it before. I gave up pies, dumplings, pancakes, cakes, and everything else for 10 years. If you eat a lot of them, people have an increased tendency to become depressed. I've been down that road. I don't want to go back to it, said Leslie. The dinner together, although it took place, left some residue in the souls of both mother and daughter. The next weekend, Leslie decided to go shopping for her mother. They spent the whole day shopping and choosing outfits. And then it turned out that the tastes of mother and daughter do not coincide. If Leslie suggested something to her mother, she didn't like it. What the mother chose for her daughter did not suit her at all. After a few days, Selena decided to abandon her vain attempts to get closer to her daughter. It turned out that she was already a formed person with her own habits and lifestyle. One more free day, Selena decided to pass with a walk in the nearest park. There she met a woman of her own age with Sarah. The women talked about their fates and families. The next day, Sarah invited Selena to visit. It turned out that she has a son who works as a doctor and takes care of his mother. But his personal life is not getting better, sighed Sarah at the table. I have him quiet and calm, never liked the free way of life, one lover. He falls in love with one girl and is ready to give his life for her, even if she is a bitch. The last one was a bitch, and she gave him a lot of shit. I don't know what the final straw was, but I guess she betrayed my son. That's it, Sarah said of her son. Selena had a bright idea at that moment. Why not introduce this promising young doctor to Leslie? I wonder how she would feel about that. And Sarah was in favor with both hands. She promised to talk to her son tonight and let Selena know tomorrow. When Leslie came out of her office that evening, she was accosted by some respectable man with a bouquet in his hands. He kept claiming that the flowers were for her. It seemed to Leslie that this was a regular pickup artist who thought he had come up with a very original way to meet a girl. That's why she didn't believe the man's words. "My name is Oliver. I work in a private practice as a surgeon. I think you thought I was some kind of a bum who only picks up girls on the street," Oliver smiled. Leslie was a little calmer now, but the flowers for a strange girl continued to embarrass her. Oliver turned out to be a calm but persistent man. He barely managed to convince Leslie to go out for coffee together. It was over coffee that they got to know each other better. At home, Selena waited for her daughter to tell her about the new acquaintance. Of course, she didn't tell her daughter that she was trying to fix her personal life behind her back. She would have taken it in stride anyway. But Leslie didn't tell her mom. Oliver now called and texted Leslie every day. She did not always find time to talk to him, but she did not refuse attention. After a while, Oliver proposed to Leslie to date and call themselves a couple. By this time, Leslie had a very positive image of Oliver in her head, so she agreed. But Leslie didn't tell her mother about it. Selena heard everything from Sarah's lips. She was glad that the mothers had managed to bring their children together. These days, Harvey is being discharged from drug treatment. Selena looked forward to that day. She was almost speechless when she saw her completely changed husband. Instead of a scruffy big egomaniac, a pleasant and tidy gentleman with rosy cheeks stood before her. The family that evening had a traditional dinner together, where Leslie was also present. Everyone was pleased. The next day, when Billy was sitting in his office, he was told that an elderly man had come to see him. He thought it was one of his business partners. He asked to invite the man into his office. A minute later, the office door opened and Harvey walked in. Billy obviously didn't expect such a surprise from his father. "Billy, my son, you will forgive me for almost all my life never taking an interest in your life. And now I see what a decent man you've become through your own efforts. I'm proud of you, son." The father hugged his son. "Dad, let's put the past in the past. At least I've grown up to be a real man." "You just take care of your mom now," Billy said. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Son, I'm an old man, and I haven't done anything serious in a long time. That's why I came to you for help. Help me find a suitable job, or at least take me on as a security guard. That's a job I can handle. I promise I won't let you down," Harvey said. Billy liked that idea. His father was healthy now, so he could keep himself busy with some simple labor. Not thinking long, Billy called one of his business partners and he accepted Harvey as a security guard for the production area. Harvey was happy to get to work. Only Selena was different now. She is often moody, sometimes complaining to her son that Julia doesn't love her. Sometimes she cries for no reason. Billy understood that the change in his mother's behavior is due to the fact that now she has no one else to save, and she wasn't used to living for herself. No matter how many hobbies Billy offered, Selena refused. Julia didn't understand it either and tried to find a hobby for her mother-in-law, but it was all in vain. Harvey enthusiastically performed his official duties. He looked forward to the day when he would receive his first paycheck. On his way home and back, he never missed a store to find some original gift for Selena. But Selena was now growing colder to him day by day. On one such day, Selena's recent friend, Sarah, invited them to visit. She had set a fancy table, and Oliver was somewhere passing the time with Leslie. The women cooed about their own things, Harvey tending to them delicately. "Harvey, don't you think the ladies are getting bored in your company? Why don't you give us a party? Would you please go get a bottle of wine for the ladies?" Sarah said coquettishly. Selena perked up and said, "Oh, he'd better not go off on his own after his treatment. Maybe we shouldn't tempt him," she said thoughtfully. "I think Harvey is a man of will. You can see it in his manly look. So Selena, don't worry, your Harvey won't upset you, will he?" Sarah looked at him questioningly. Admittedly, it was the first time Harvey met such an attitude to himself. Sarah immediately put him in a certain position, where he must fulfill the whims of ladies, but himself to remain a man of will. And so it happened. Sarah and Selena drank a bottle of wine for two, and Harvey limited himself to delicate courtship of them. That said, he had not been tempted to join them. Oliver and Leslie, on the other hand, had been going at it these days. Oliver had been swamped with work lately. As a good surgeon, he's in great demand in the medical community. He's often invited for consultations and complex surgeries. These events can last for hours, during which time Oliver is unavailable for calls. After a series of such unavailability, Leslie had the thought in her head that this relationship might not work out either. What she didn't realize was that it was just a shadow of her past that continued to haunt her. The shadow had transformed itself into the image of another woman, and every time, she convinced Leslie that Oliver had another woman on the side that he was devoting his time to. Leslie wanted to tell him her concerns, but she was afraid that he might respond in the affirmative. How could she live with that? So she decided to silently ignore Oliver and try to switch back to her work. Oliver couldn't understand what was going on with her lover. Having experienced betrayal in a previous relationship, he also thought that maybe she had met someone else and couldn't say it directly. So their relationship stopped for a while. But Leslie realized that she was already used to Oliver and she felt good around him. To take away the heartache, now she cries again in the psychologist's office. Thankfully, at least with a psychologist, she was lucky this time that he was able to understand the roots of what was happening. You have no facts and evidence that your young man is going to betray you or has already betrayed you. You were faced with the unknown when he did not return your calls. Where there is uncertainty, there is a shadow of the past in the form of doubt. And in your past, there was no image of trusting the male gender in general. This in girls is usually formed in childhood with the help of a loving and caring father. That's where the roots of your problem are, the psychologist said. Leslie is now finally convinced that this shadow of the past will never let her go. Where will she find this image of trusting relationships and how to download them into her inner world if childhood cannot be returned and her father cannot be remade? The next weekend, Sarah invited Selena and Harvey to her cottage. The friends enjoyed the sun and fresh air during the day. Sarah, as always in her character, she challenged Harvey and made him fulfill petty lady whims. Harvey tried his best to keep a low profile and was successful in all his tasks. The ladies wanted ice cream. He just drove to the neighboring village. In the evening, the ladies got cold, and Harvey had to go around the whole village to get a heater to warm up the house for the night. Selena had been worried about how Harvey would cope with such tasks. Maybe it was worth the inconvenience. She felt a vague resentment towards Sarah. The vacation at the cottage had gone well. It was only on her return that Selena felt unwell. Her blood pressure was high and her heart was racing. The housemates thought it was because of the unusual activity, but the hardest part began at night. She fell into an incomprehensible foggy state, but did not tell the children about it, so as not to disturb them. Toward morning, she decided to go to the kitchen and drink some water. But after taking a couple steps into the living room, she fainted with a rumble. Billy and Julia quickly ran to her aid and called an ambulance. As the ambulance arrived, something strange continued to happen to Selena. Her body grew cold, her eyeballs rolled back, and her face turned dark blue. Billy realized that he was losing his mother in his hands. He went into a panic. Along with them, so did Harvey. Only Julia diligently continued to check her mother-in-law's pulse and perform indirect heart massage. The ambulance barely made it across the threshold of the apartment. The doctor on duty ordered to take the woman to the hospital immediately. An hour later, the doctor informed Billy that Selena had suffered a massive stroke. Now the doctors were fighting to save her life. Billy and Harvey kept watch under the windows of the intensive care unit day and night, but there was no good news. Julia tried to stay close to Leslie and support her. Leslie cried all the time. She had been convinced all her life that there would be beautiful days when she could fully enjoy a mother's love. She'd worked toward it, digging deeper into herself each time with the help of her. Admittedly, it was the first time Harvey met such an attitude to himself. Sarah immediately put him in a certain position, where he must fulfill the whims of ladies, but himself to remain a man of will. And so it happened. Sarah and Selena drank a bottle of wine for two, and Harvey limited himself to delicate courtship of them. That said, he had not been tempted to join them. Oliver and Leslie, on the other hand, had been going at it these days. Oliver had been swamped with work lately. As a good surgeon, he's in great demand in the medical community. He's often invited for consultations and complex surgeries. These events can last for hours, during which time Oliver is unavailable for calls. After a series of such unavailability, Leslie had the thought in her head that this relationship might not work out either. What she didn't realize was that it was just a shadow of her past that continued to haunt her. The shadow had transformed itself into the image of another woman, and every time, she convinced Leslie that Oliver had another woman on the side that he was devoting his time to. Leslie wanted to tell him her concerns, but she was afraid that he might respond in the affirmative. How could she live with that? So she decided to silently ignore Oliver and try to switch back to her work. Oliver couldn't understand what was going on with her lover. Having experienced betrayal in a previous relationship, he also thought that maybe she had met someone else and couldn't say it directly. So their relationship stopped for a while. But Leslie realized that she was already used to Oliver and she felt good around him. To take away the heartache, now she cries again in the psychologist's office. Thankfully, at least with a psychologist, she was lucky this time that he was able to understand the roots of what was happening. You have no facts and evidence that your young man is going to betray you or has already betrayed you. You were faced with the unknown when he did not return your calls. Where there is uncertainty, there is a shadow of the past in the form of doubt. And in your past, there was no image of trusting the male gender in general. This in girls is usually formed in childhood with the help of a loving and caring father. That's where the roots of your problem are, the psychologist said. Leslie is now finally convinced that this shadow of the past will never let her go. Where will she find this image of trusting relationships and how to download them into her inner world if childhood cannot be returned and her father cannot be remade? The next weekend, Sarah invited Selena and Harvey to her cottage. The friends enjoyed the sun and fresh air during the day. Sarah, as always in her character, she challenged Harvey and made him fulfill petty lady whims. Harvey tried his best to keep a low profile and was successful in all his tasks. The ladies wanted ice cream. He just drove to the neighboring village. In the evening, the ladies got cold, and Harvey had to go around the whole village to get a heater to warm up the house for the night. Selena had been worried about how Harvey would cope with such tasks. Maybe it was worth the inconvenience. She felt a vague resentment towards Sarah. The vacation at the cottage had gone well. It was only on her return that Selena felt unwell. Her blood pressure was high and her heart was racing. The housemates thought it was because of the unusual activity, but the hardest part began at night. She fell into an incomprehensible foggy state, but did not tell the children about it, so as not to disturb them. Toward morning, she decided to go to the kitchen and drink some water, but after taking a couple steps into the living room, she fainted with a rumble. Billy and Julia quickly ran to her aid and called an ambulance. As the ambulance arrived, something strange continued to happen to Selena. Her body grew cold, her eyeballs rolled back, and her face turned dark blue. Billy realized that he was losing his mother in his hands. He went into a panic. Along with them, so did Harvey. Only Julia diligently continued to check her mother-in-law's pulse and perform indirect heart massage. The ambulance barely made it across the threshold of the apartment. The doctor on duty ordered to take the woman to the hospital immediately. An hour later, the doctor informed Billy that Selena had suffered a massive stroke. Now the doctors were fighting to save her life. Billy and Harvey kept watch under the windows of the intensive care unit day and night, but there was no good news. Julia tried to stay close to Leslie and support her. Leslie cried all the time. She had been convinced all her life that there would be beautiful days when she could fully enjoy a mother's love. She worked toward it, digging deeper into herself each time with the help of a psychologist. She was on her way to finding the strength to forgive her parents for her childhood offenses and finally build a warm adult relationship with them. She realized that without this, she would not be able to achieve personal happiness. Now it turns out that she has no chance to redraw her disfigured childhood picture of the world. 5 days later, the doctor regretfully informed her that Selena could not be saved. She gave her soul to God without ever regaining consciousness. Selena's funeral was held. For Leslie and Billy, their mother's passing was a real blow. While Leslie regretted her unrealized love for her mother, Billy felt guilt for not being able to keep his mother safe. Harvey felt bitterness in his soul, but from all strength kept himself in control, so as not to snap into drunkenness. The real support for the family was Sarah. She had an amazing way of finding the right words for each member of the family. Harvey, hang in there. And don't feel sorry for yourself. Selena has given you the best of herself. You should be a pillar of strength for your children and grandchildren out of gratitude to her. Billy, you've shown yourself to be a model of a decent son. Selena had so many good things to say about you in her lifetime. I am sure her soul is pleased with your care. Don't beat yourself up. Man is not God. He has no power over the life and death of his loved ones. Let your mother go and let her sleep in peace. You've done your duty as a son to the fullest. Leslie, you have your whole life ahead of you. You're gonna have your own family and your own kids, and they're gonna be your outlet. Don't let this grief eat away at your already wounded soul. Let go of your mother and strive for your future. These were the words Sarah spoke to the grief-stricken family members. Turns out, time really does heal everything, and what it doesn't heal, it makes less painful. After a while, Harvey's family began to adjust to life without Selena. Harvey himself continued to work. He wasn't even going back to drinking. Today, he received his paycheck and thought about who of his loved ones would be pleased with what. He liked shopping and the process of choosing something nice for his loved ones. And it was good that he had already managed to buy Selena several times pleasant little things. A purse, a neckerchief, or perfume. True, Selena never used them. Instead of joy, she wailed to her husband, I wish you'd bought something for the grandchildren or for the table. Why do I have to go to all this trouble? You're wasting your money, she said. And when she and Selena visited Sarah or went out together, money flew out of her purse like the wind. She'd order flowers for the table just to make it pretty, and then she'd want music for the atmosphere. Harvey never knew what challenges he would have to take on. Now Harvey remembers those days with warmth in his soul. In the evening after work today, he wanted to surprise Leslie. He bought a box of chocolates at the store and waited for her in the entryway of her apartment. And Leslie was intentionally staying out until midnight tonight. Oliver had been calling her for a few days now, asking to see her. Sarah, of course, told him that Leslie had lost her mother and was heartbroken. She advised her son to stay close to Leslie and try to find a way to approach her. Oliver himself wouldn't mind restoring their relationship, as he'd also realized how used to Leslie he was and didn't want to lose her at all. Only Leslie was being stubborn. She ignored his calls when he came to her office. She asked her assistant to inform Oliver of her absence. Today, Leslie thought it was more likely that Oliver would be guiding her in the driveway. By now, she'd already decided that there was no happy relationship in her life, so there was no point in feeding Oliver false hopes. He was a good man, and it was better to forget her now and start building other, promising relationships with a girl who didn't have such deep childhood traumas. So after work, she gathered all her girlfriends and went to rest. Harvey waited a couple hours, then went home. The next day, he decided to visit Leslie right at the workplace. He had recently seen Billy's office and was extremely city for his son, and Leslie is also developing her own business, and her father has never been interested in the details. Today, he decided to make up for that missing page of his life. When someone knocked on the office door, Leslie was annoyed. She doesn't like to be distracted by the smallest of things. But apparently, her assistant is not in place and will have to accept the unexpected guest. "Come in," Leslie said. "All the more reason for you to come in," Leslie mumbled to herself. She was extremely surprised to see Harvey on the threshold of her office. "Daddy, what are you doing here? How did you find me?" Leslie asked. "And I was just walking down the street and asked passers-by where to find a hard-working girl, Leslie. It turned out everyone knows where Leslie works all day long," said the father. "And who works hard? To him and the candy," said Harvey, and took out of his bag a box of candy. "Dad, you surprise me. Who put you up to this?" Leslie could hardly hide her excitement and pleasant surprise. "So who should influence a father to just visit his daughter and make her take a break from work?" said Harvey. "Thanks, Dad. Well, as you can see, this is where my office is. I am the most important person here. I have 4 specialists working under me. We work all day long to turn simple houses and apartments into works of art. Different people come to us and ask us to organize their space so that they're dwelling every day pleasing to their eyes. And we are happy to do it," said Leslie proudly. "Do you get tired of it all, or do you like it?" asked my father. "In general, I really enjoy interior design. That's why I can work 16 or 20 hours a day. That's when I get really tired," Leslie said. "And I'm proud of you, daughter. It takes talent to be able to do this kind of work. And even talent alone is no guarantee. It takes character to achieve something. Then you can count on the realization of talent. And you, I see, have successfully coped with this task. So you have both talent and character. That's why I'm proud of you," Harvey said. "Daddy, thank you. It means a lot to me," said Leslie, not hiding her sincere joy. By this time, she had already eaten one candy after another. "Tell me, what winds brought you here? How are you doing at work?" Leslie asked. "At work I'm fine. Without my close inspection, even a fly does not pass into the protected area. And it is pleasant enough to communicate with very well-mannered and cultured young people of your age," said Harvey. "Well, in fact, I came to you on business. Yesterday, we got our paychecks. I even got a bonus. Today, I decided to do something nice for my daughter," said Harvey, then took his old wallet out of his pocket, took out some bills, and put them in front of Leslie. "Daddy, what are you doing? Keep that money. I make enough," said Leslie. "I know that your brother, earn many times more than me. But I'm your father, and I'm happy to finally realize that. I try to live now in harmony with the voice of my heart, and it conveys to me that my heart wants to show my fatherly love for you in every way," said Harvey. Here Leslie was alarmed, because she remembered the words of the psychologist. She was glad that in time she caught herself in the shadows of her past, and she has time to choose a different approach to the main man of her life. "Exactly. I just needed some money today." "Well, how much is here?" said Leslie, took the money from the table and started counting. Then she turned to her father. "That's not enough. Give me more," said Leslie. Harvey rejoiced, took out his wallet and pulled out some more bills. "Here you go, daughter. If you need it, I can give you everything. I don't have any special expenses," said Harvey. "All do not need, it is enough," said Leslie, and put all the bills in his wallet. For the rest of the day, she could not concentrate on her work. She was overwhelmed by pleasant experiences that she had never felt before in her life. It was as if a big mountain had grown inside her, where she could run to at any moment and hide from any misfortune. She didn't realize yet that the shadow of the past from her distant childhood had receded and a new image of her caring father had taken its place. But changes in life happen regardless of a person's understanding. A couple days later, she thought about Oliver and their relationship again. Suddenly, she realized how stupid she was being with him. And really, Oliver had given no reason for her to doubt his fidelity. And her habit of believing every thought that came into her head seemed a little strange. She decided to rectify the situation immediately and dialed Oliver's number herself. He was glad to get her call. They met the same day and promised each other to never part again. To fulfill this in practice, they decided to enter into an official marriage. Oliver and Leslie decided to have a modest, no-frills wedding. Immediately after the celebration, they set off on a long journey together. Sarah was a little sad that now she would be all alone, but there was much more joy. After all these exciting events, Harvey felt unwell. For several days now, he had been unable to go to work and was lying at home. At Billy's suggestion to go to the doctor, he refuses. Billy realizes that the grief of losing Selena still continues to torment his father. At a family dinner, which Harvey didn't want to attend, Julia starts a conversation. Harvey needs to unwind. Could it be that his work is wearing him down? Especially since Selena left, he hasn't been himself. We need to find some recreational activities for him, she said. What kind of recreation can there be when he's approaching 70? He should just enjoy a vacation, but he doesn't want that either, said Billy. And we have seen that when Grandpa talks to Grandma Sarah, he becomes cheerful and kind, said Tom, Billy's eldest son. Billy and Julia looked at each other and both froze in thought. Then Mickey decided to speak his mind. Why shouldn't she be our grandmother? We have no grandmother now, and she has no grandchildren, but she is very kind. Mickey put the question to him. Well, that's a question Grandma Casey and Grandpa Harvey have to decide for themselves, said Billy. Dad, you said yourself that grandparents become like children. Maybe they're afraid or embarrassed to tell you. You just suggest it to them, like you suggest us to do something, and maybe they'll like it. Mickey said, and felt incredibly proud of his ingenuity. Instantly, they started laughing together. Julia took that as a good sign. Children can sense everything after all. After this family council, new plans had emerged. Now it was time to get Harvey back on his feet and put them into action. Thankfully, Harvey was on the mend and started going to work again. One day, Billy invited his father to a nearby pub to watch soccer together. When both were in high spirits from the victory of their favorite team, Billy started a conversation. Dad, don't you think Sarah has a thing for you and you for her? Billy also put the question in the way his youngest son Mickey knows how to do. Harvey was a little confused and didn't know what to say. It turned out that he himself had not noticed his sympathy for Sarah. She really knows how to cheer him up instantly and always finds the right words. We've already understood everything and we're happy for you. We'll help you organize a beautiful romantic evening when you tell Sarah your decision, said Billy. Harvey didn't have to think about it much. He was already feeling lonely, and he didn't mind the company of cheerful Sarah. But how could he tell her? What if she took offense? And Selena considered her his friend. Wouldn't that be a betrayal of her memory? He decided to talk to Sarah himself about it. The answer to that, too, was brilliant. Selena was dear to me, too. If she was still alive, I would be happy for Leslie and Oliver right now. Sadly, she's not among us. But she told me many times how much she loved you and would do anything to make sure you were cared for. I think she was an incredibly strong woman, because not everyone is able to carry her feelings through the hardships of life and protect them no matter what. Yes, sometimes it was hard for your children to understand, but Selena was always devoted to you. I think that now her soul wishes the same thing, that you do not suffer but are cared for. If Selene's spirit gives any sign of that, I wouldn't mind brightening your loneliness, said Sarah. That same night, Sarah had a dream about Celine. In this dream, she was wearing a smart dress and walking through a poppy field. Her face was flooded with light and her eyes were shining with bliss. Suddenly, she walks up to Sarah, pulls out a mysterious talisman and throws it in her direction. "He was very dear to me. Take it to yourself and keep it safe. I trust it only to you." With these words, Selena flew away to the heavens. When Sarah woke up, she realized everything correctly, so she would grow old together with Harvey. Oliver hated being called a bum, a beggar, or a tramp. He preferred the socially neutral term free artist. He had felt that way long before he had been on the street. What was he, really, a bum? It was just that living within four walls was weighing him down. Besides, he really was an artist. Once his paintings were popular and in demand. In those glorious times, he even held several chamber exhibitions in small galleries. A dozen critics called the works significant, and a couple more disgusting ointment. At that moment, the artist didn't care what some underachievers said about him. Customers paid off solid fees for portraits, which Oliver, in his own apt expression, wrote the heel of a jackleg. It is not that he bathed in money, but the need did not know, and enjoyed widespread fame in narrow circles. However, fortune is a capricious girl, and after many years of upsurge, after worldly fame and relative wealth, can always come a period of oblivion. For Oliver, that time dragged on. First, he sent a gallery owner on a pedestrian journey who tolerated all his antics and picked up customers. Here's what George, the artist, said that day. "You're literally stealing from me. You're forcing me into some kind of channel where I'm cramped. I'm going free, do you hear me?" What George said, Oliver couldn't remember. Then he proudly slammed the door, leaving his apartment. He left his shamed wife and children, who by then were relatively mature and tired of his antics, and went on a free voyage. At first, everything was fine. His own studio, clients, sitters, and wine, a whole sea of wine, in which he began to choke every now and then. "You'll come back to me." Helga, his lawfully wedded wife, shouted at him as he left with a small suitcase. "You'll come crawling back on your knees." "I will," Oliver replied with a smile. "That's what you were before me, huh? Just a little shop girl. And now, an artist's wife. Sounds proud, doesn't it?" As he left Helga, the free artist smiled. He never fought at all, cutting bridges. It's just that life in one marriage, in one gallery was weighing on him, especially all these conventions, to sleep at home, to be faithful to his wife, not to bring to the apartment of favorite women, not to sell Nojeko paintings to random customers, and not to exhibit in other galleries. Of course, the wife could tolerate this at the beginning of their life together. Oliver's lifestyle seemed to her bohemian and suing respect. She also saw him as a genius. But gradually the free-spirited artist became too voluminous a figure for their modest third-floor apartment. There were high ceilings of more than 3 meters, but even that was not enough for the flight of the soul. The gallery, which brought him a good income, also became too cramped. He saw himself as a rising star of world painting, but the outlines were ghostly. He was going to conquer Paris, Berlin, Madrid, one by one. And he would have, if it hadn't been for a morbid addiction to alcohol. So he left both the gallery and the apartment, where he even thought of going out of the window. But the third floor is too small for that flight, which sometimes allow themselves to make a saturated life creators. That's why Oliver went out not through the window, but through the door, and has been wandering the world for 10 years. "You are not a bum," said to him another acquaintance over a bottle of cheap wine. "You're the best artist in the world." "No," Oliver replied flirtatiously. "The best, but not in the world, but in the country." "You're a genius," continued the acquaintance, enjoying a drink at someone else's expense. "No, not at all," objected the artist. "I am not a genius, but outstanding, but only to find my paints, brushes, and sketches." casual acquaintances did not stay with him longer than there was money left for food and drink. The older Oliver got, the worse his teeth and hair looked. The fewer women became willing to take him in and model for him. And now the thought of returning to Helga didn't seem quite so frightening anymore. Especially since he knew that half of the apartment still belonged to him and that he could find a job as a decorator, or a painter at the worst. He could work with large volumes and liked it too, but his pride wouldn't let him. This quality, without which it is unthinkable to achieve success in any field, is gradually becoming a yoke, a burden that dragged him to the bottom, into a pool of wine and vices. That morning, the chief physician's anxiety was at its peak. His best quality is intuition. It worked well in diagnosis, but it did not help at all in management. He had an intuitive sense of what a person was like, but he didn't always understand what to do about it. So when the phone rang in his office, he already realized that he would not hear any good news. "Unfortunately, we have to say goodbye to you," the velvet voice on the other end of the wire did without preamble, and did not tolerate objections. "Really?" Andrew perked up. "Why?" "You are unable to clean up the hospital," the voice said. "Our orders have not been executed for months." "I dare to disagree," said the chief physician, loosening his tie. In principle, if he was going to argue with the caller, it was only for pro forma. In fact, he was glad of the unexpected freedom. The hospital was in perfect order. The occupancy rate is less than 90%. The recurrence rate is very low. "How long will you put up with the ritual store near the main entrance?" the voice asked. "How many complaints do we have to listen to before we reach your mind? Or at least your heart? What does it mean to tolerate?" The former chief physician was perplexed. A ritual store for the hospital is quite a thing. Their people can buy everything they need if something goes wrong, and in general, what are you implying? "Me?" the voice interjected. "You should have told me that a month ago." Silence. Andrew really couldn't and didn't like to lead. All affairs were handled by his deputies, to whom he gave full freedom of action. In fact, he was the one who started the funeral parlor of some shrewd businessman. But the hospital received money for the rent, and also, according to Andrew's firm belief, the proximity of such an institution should discipline the patients. "I'm giving you one last chance," the voice said. "I was persuaded to fire you for incompatibility with your position, but you understand. You won't be able to. I get the hint." Andrew reported cheerfully, "It's easy. I'll write a letter right now, but don't forget that I am a materially responsible person. To whom will I transfer the household? What if the new person is missing something?" "For this do not worry," assured the voice. "Make an inventory and leave the business. The new head doctor is not your concern." The voice hung up. Andrew sighed. This is not how he had imagined his departure. In fact, it's even better. There would be no proceedings, lavish send-offs and tears of longing. He would write a statement, leave his keys and goodbye. He couldn't wait to get back to practicing medicine. Better yet, to go to some remote village with 10 houses and treat there. That's where the life is. That's where the real challenges are. To lead a large hospital, he liked at first, but gradually all the pleasure came to naught. Half the time all he did was sign papers and deal with the complaints of disgruntled patients. "Christopher," Andrew said, pressing the call button. "Christopher, dance. You're going to have a new boss. The weather can be nice in September, but it's best not to take any chances." That's why Oliver wore a raincoat. You never know when it's going to start raining. Winter was coming soon, so the free artist had to find a temporary home. He had an option in mind. His once good friend, whom he called not an artist, but a craftsman. To ask him for help, he had to step on his own pride. After making his way to the private sector, he went through the open gate without a bell and knocked on the door of the cottage. After a couple of minutes of waiting, a friend appeared in the doorway, and his face could not be called pleased. "Hello, Vance," Oliver said courteously and bowed, standing on the doorstep to his longtime friend. "Long time no see, friend. I was just passing by, so I thought I'd stop by and see how you were doing. I'll see if you've restored the gazebo that I destroyed last time due to my gross negligence." "What do you want?" the man answered rudely. "Are you trying to make a pig of me again? Or a whole pig farm, eh?" With Vance in the past, they had a long-standing collaboration. Both artists, they had taken very different paths. If Oliver was really looking for concentrated freedom, Vance was looking for enrichment. If Oliver was in demand with women and drew inspiration from them, Vance was never really loved. This information, of course, had to be kept in mind and kept to himself. But the free artist could not. At the last creative evening, which rolled into a banal feast, Oliver told Vance everything he thought about him. He did not keep silent about the greed of his comrade, who not a dozen times helped him financially. And lastly, he burned the carved arbor, admiring the flames of his favorite element. It was about 6 months ago, and since then the entrance to the hospitable house of the old comrade was closed. "I should like to spend the night," Oliver asked, as if nothing had happened. "To go to your bathhouse. I'd like to make pies on your charming stove. By the way, did you put the tandoor together like you dreamed?" "That's a wrap," Vance replied, not leaving the doorway. Oliver was looking for a way to get ahead, to sit on the living room couch, and then God himself wouldn't be able to kick him out. "Why don't you put my youngest daughter in the bed? To keep your old bones warm?" Considering the age of the artists, and each of them is close to the 6'10", the proposal did not seem so vulgar, and the daughter is long since matured and overripe. She was 30, and Vance had given up hope of getting her out of her creative home and into someone else's marriage. "I'm sorry, friend," Oliver said. "I overreacted that time. I was wrong, I was rude, I was unfriendly. I let down a man I should have been proud to know, and I. The artist rolled his eyes and raised the elbow of his hand to his face, depicting sincere remorse. "Really?" Vance marveled, shifting to a whisper. "Only that time? Or do you only think of my friendship when you need a place to sleep and a drink?" "Well, and all the times before that," agreed the free artist. "Yes, you're right. I don't know how to value either friendship or love. I've betrayed 100 times the people I should have held on to. There must be a flaw in my soul, somewhere in my heart, a little demon that's undermining me from the inside." My God, what a speech. Vance admired him insincerely and splashed his hands. "But I've lost count of the number of times you've said something like that. 10? 20? It's about time you thought of something else." "Vance, you have to understand," Oliver pleaded. "Winter is coming, and I have nowhere to go. So you want to stay with me again until spring? Is that why you've come all this way, clopping around in your worn-out boots?" "Of course," Oliver rejoiced. He took the rough tone as an unspoken agreement. "We'll have a great time. I'll write a dozen pieces for you. You can sell them and make good money. My name is still remembered and my paintings are waiting, right?" Of course, Oliver was being dishonest. He'd started several mediums in his friend's studio at his own request, but he'd never finished a single one. And given his specific technique, it was unlikely that anyone had managed to complete the projects. Besides, Oliver flatly refused to paint exactly what the master of the house demanded, and the resulting smudge would hardly sell for good money, if at all. "Don't spoil my canvases and paints." Vance was indignant. He was ready to forgive his comrade once again, but the mention of unfulfilled orders was the last straw. He was the one who had to work day and night in the workshop to meet the deadline. He was such an overly obliging man. "For the love of God, please don't touch the brushes in my house." "So you're letting me in?" Oliver asked with a smile. He interpreted Vance's mood in his own way. "I could tell you a lot of things, you know, but you're better with your tongue. I could never do that." "So just, no," the former comrade said and slammed the door loudly in Oliver's face. This world had never been so cruel to a freelance artist. If even his best friend left him alone on the cold streets, who could he rely on? Of course, he was unfair to Vance. Too often, he called him a lowlife, a talentless person, an imitator, an opportunist, a canvasser, mocked his commissioned canvases, laughed at the way Vance himself makes frames with a mitra saw and thus extracts an extra penny from the order, emptied his home bar with such speed that the owner had to hide wine and cognac in hiding places on the plot. But Vance Evan nodded with restraint, though his medical sense told him that he would not like this big official's offer. Since he had poured a bucket of flattery on him, he was about to be asked to do something that he wouldn't do in his right mind. Which, in principle, you could refuse, but I don't think you came all this way just to give me a favorable review, Evan said. Though I do appreciate being seen and recognized for my efforts. Right? Jack smiled. What if I told you that a small but very affluent town needed a chief physician? A well-known cardiac hospital? Evan immediately grew sad. There were many hospitals on the map of his vast homeland. Where things were going well, chief physicians could lead for decades, and where there were problems, the chiefs changed periodically. And where there hadn't been a real owner for a long time, it was hard to build a system from scratch. What city? Evan asked, even though he already knew what we were talking about. The city you know best, Jack smiled. The city that gave us such a promising and brilliant doctor. No, Evan cut him off. I'm definitely not going there. The smile never left Jack's face. An experienced official, he knew which strings to pull, which keys to press to get the right tune. And if the doctor couldn't be bribed with flattery, he had to use the heavy artillery. It's something he knew and loved. Rumor has it, the official yawned, that you can't find texture for your work. Work? Evan was surprised. Well, with good results. Jack stretched out, with the right persistence. Damn it, nothing is impossible in this world, my dear colleague. In two, Evan repeated in a tone that brooked no objection, and I'll be challenged by someone who actually knows medicine, not a pretender. 2 years, the official savored these words like an expensive wine. Will you really have time, my dear colleague? And will I have time to convince everyone? I'll work nights. In that case, Jack's smile became even wider, which seemed contrary to anatomy. In that case, we need to discuss the details and choose a date on which you're ready to begin your duties. I'll turn in my files and get to work. Friday at the latest. The official stood up, adjusting his jacket. Evan hated healthcare workers who favored formal dress. He himself always wore what he was comfortable in. That's what you can do to help a patient in a jacket and white shirt. One last thing, muttered the official. Start working at the hospital by looking for new deputies. The ones we have are no good, if you say so. After his conversation with Jack, Evan felt as if he'd done something immoral. Should he have accepted a transfer to another hospital, even if it was as chief of medicine? He cherished the hope that as soon as he became a candidate of medical sciences, he would immediately break into the vertical of medical power and bring order there, so that hospitals and polyclinics would receive not only criticism, but also equipment and medicines. Still, the feeling was sickening. Why had he said he was coming to the new place on Friday? What was the rush? It was already Wednesday. Evan went to the smoking room he'd been avoiding for a year and a half. And there he met the man whose help he needed right now. Give him a smoke, he asked Carlo, his friend and longtime colleague. You quit, the doctor replied, taking a cigarette out of the pack. Yes, Evan agreed, lighting up, and picked it up again. I'm transferred. Tomorrow is the last day. Will now be the head doctor. I heard that, Carlo smiled. Rumors have been going around the hospital for a week. Congratulations. The smoke burned his lungs. Why is he the last to hear the news? When the big official from the Ministry of Health had announced his arrival, he had already suspected the possibility of a promotion, but he wasn't sure. Carlo could have at least hinted at it. I'm not happy about it. I've always dreamed of being a chief physician, but not in this hospital. Any reason? Carlo asked. Yes, there are. Deeply personal. Is it a lot of work? No, Evan shook his head. There's a patient there, you know. One I don't want to cross paths with. Patient? Carlo was surprised. Where are you and where are the patients, Evan? Are you going to celebrate the promotion or not? Only in a small circle. A very small circle. Cars were passing by, but they didn't care about a homeless man about to throw himself off a bridge. No one even slowed down to shout encouragement. After the foot got stiff, the free artist put it on the ground. Now they had to wait for the cramp to pass. In half an hour, only one patrol car had stopped near Oliver. The bridge, spanning high over the river, was the main attraction of the area. The water gave Oliver inspiration, and he had once painted a series of landscapes depicting the enchanting place. Come on, jump. Thomas demanded it. Jump. The whole town will breathe a sigh of relief. I'll keep going. The police inspector, if he followed all the instructions, was supposed to stall and dissuade suicides from jumping into the abyss, and also to furtively call a psychologist so as not to provoke the person to take decisive action. But Thomas had deviated from the instructions by 180 degrees. He was fed up with the antics of Oliver, who thought he was a brilliant artist. Why didn't you leave? He asked. I didn't have time, the artist replied. Then fly away. How long am I going to stand here and cheer you up? At this time of year, the vagrant usually left the city and went to winter in warmer places. And there he'd piss off the local police with his inability to live in society. This year it's all gone wrong, which means trouble and more work. Thomas was being ironic when he suggested that the artist jump, but it was a joke about his secret desires. You've got to stall me, Oliver objected, as if you don't know the instructions. I do, Thomas replied. I know, that's why I'm going to confront you while no one is looking. Come here, come closer. Oliver was always messing up the townspeople's lives, mostly with his words and vulgar pictures, which the artist considered masterpieces. And it would be all right if the tramp did something serious and disappeared from sight for a long time. Thomas knew from experience that in penitentiaries there was a high demand for those who could draw. No, the antics would be of a kind that could not be expected to last for a long sentence of 15 days at most. The free artist did not argue with the guardian and stepped away from the low railing. He raised his hands, showing that he realized his mistake and changed his mind. I understand, he replied. I get it. Thanks to your heartfelt words, Thomas, I have decided to abandon my shameful scheme and continue to bring bright colors to this gray earth. Can you give me a ride to the hospital? All right, get in, Thomas nodded. Only on the paper. And don't ever leave the hospital. Do you hear me? Fall is deceiving. The homeless know it especially well. You can be sweltering hot during the day and freezing cold at night. In their city, the range of temperatures was extremely wide. And while during the day in September some people managed to sunbathe and even swim a little in the river, at night the frost on the grass or car windows could turn to ice. That was why Oliver wanted so badly to wait out the months ahead. Otherwise, October would have to be spent in some basement or attic. For a while after his wife left him, he had a workshop that was supposed to be heated with a wood stove. Oliver had been told 100 times that the wood should be loaded into the furnace gradually, not to heat the stove to red hot. But what do these people know about art? Once, when he had a session with a charming model, he overdid it. The model wouldn't let go of her bra until the temperature in the studio was close to acceptable levels. So he loaded the stove to the limit and splashed kerosene to be sure. Of course, that house did not burn down. The fireman, who immediately arrived at the call and thoroughly doused the hearth of the fire, prevented it. But all 5 floors below the attic were seriously damaged by water. Not only his work, but also his pride died in this element. So when the frost comes, he'll have to seek survival in the basement. When I was in jail, liked to tell the artist after this incident. In fact, for violation of fire safety, he was arrested for only 15 days. Some hotheads at the time wanted to make the artist pay, but what can you take from him? Since then, Oliver was panic-stricken by Borgias, preferring to warm himself with firewater. The artist liked the cardiac hospital. The main building was 8 stories high, and not only locals were sent here. There is always someone to talk, fight, and drink with. Excellent canteen. If you know how to be persistent, they'll feed you well. The appearance was somewhat spoiled by the proximity of the ritual store. It was located in an annex near the main building, as if to suggest that it was waiting for patients who were not ready to follow the doctor's recommendations. Oliver didn't mind the proximity, for he wasn't afraid of death. He would have to wait out the future frosts, hold out a little, and then the strait would be waiting. Alas, the medical registrar was not inclined to share his aspirations. "Patient, keep order," the woman asked. For 10 minutes now, she had been trying to explain to the free artist that becoming a hospital patient was not so simple. "We shouldn't hospitalize you without a referral. Don't hold up the line or I'll be forced to call security." She's new, isn't she? The threat made no impression on Oliver. As soon as the guard saw the troublemaker, he hid in his booth and just watched through a slit in the ground. Near the registrar's office, there was a decent queue. The artist was preventing those who really needed help from getting it. "And I say, you should not, but obliged to hospitalize me," shouted Oliver. "My health is disgusting. Look how my hands are trembling." The artist stretched out his palm. The tremor was visible to the naked eye. However, after so many years of drinking and wandering, it was a relatively minor problem. It was worse when it came to filling his stomach. Oliver hadn't had a poppy in his mouth since morning, and he was hungry and thirsty. "Man, I've told you for the last time, it's not allowed," the receptionist replied patiently. "First get a referral in the district polyclinic, then undergo an examination, take tests, and then welcome to the hospital. I do not have so much time," pathetically shouted Oliver. I'm dying. I need immediate, urgent care." "Next," said the receptionist, and turned away from the free artist. The angry crowd shifted the old man to the very edge of the counter. Outraged, Oliver was still making noise and swearing for a long time. He said that he had given himself to this city and people by immortalizing them both on dozens of canvases. Claimed he'd ruined his heart by worrying about the future of the locals. Like Michelangelo, he spent nights in the studio creating masterpieces, ruining his eyesight, even after Oliver had bent over to look inside. "No one," the guard answered, continuing to hide. "No one said there's no one here. Just go already. The sanitarium is cancelled." And when the artist had moved a safe distance away, the guard rose and added, "That Walker. Modern genius. Damn him." It was not a flight, however, but a diversion, for Oliver was not going to surrender without a fight. Retreating to the main entrance, he made one last attempt to storm the building. It was a busy Thursday afternoon outside the hospital. If he faked a heart attack believably enough, he'd be admitted to the hospital. It's all about believing himself. What does a heart attack look like? As he stepped out onto the porch, Oliver suddenly shrieked, putting all his artistry into his voice and movements. "Help! People! Help me! I'm dying! Oh, farewell, motherland!" and collapsed on his knees. Apparently, the sudden action, hunger and forced sobriety had made him really dizzy. Oliver felt that he really didn't feel well, began to gulp air like a fish. The sounds began to drift away, and the picture first turned green and then dim. He grasped the handrail with all his might, but his weakened fingers couldn't manage it. "Is he ill?" the woman questioned, standing in front of the free artist. "Is he really ill?" "Coldly, citizen, coldly," said the guard. He ran up to Oliver with the most experienced man, the local Zaphos, the deputy chief physician on the economic part. Now the doctor will say, "Calm down, I'm a doctor," said the storekeeper and pretended to check his pulse. The man knew Oliver all too well. The free artist had spent a couple of years in the ward on his floor, turning the model ward into an artistic commune. And then he'd kept himself discharged for a long time, faking heart attacks every now and then. When the superintendent took the homeless man's dirty hand, ostensibly to check his pulse, he immediately wanted to disinfect his palms. "Pulse is fine," the man said to the crowd. He didn't want to check the rest of his body. "He's just a faker who's gonna make normal people run out of room in the hospital. You grab the legs, I'll grab the arms." The guard and the storekeeper dragged the beggar around the corner, where he was much less visible. "It's nothing," Christopher thought. "He'll lie down for a while and then he'll be gone." However, how he has got into the part. Indeed, Oliver did not utter a sound as they dragged him, though the way was a decent distance. The artist's head was thrown back, so the men had to be careful. "What's the matter, imposter?" said the bolder guard as they laid Oliver down on the pavement. "Nothing to say, faker." The artist only mumbled something unintelligible. His consciousness hadn't left him, but it was very foggy, and even the feeling of resentment toward those who should have helped and saved him was dulled. He thought that if it was death, it was no big deal. It wasn't painful at all, and it was hardly scary at all. He had always dreamed of meeting a creator and asking his opinion of his own works, whether they were masterpieces or cheesy. There are several reasons why a person does not want to return to his hometown. The main one is the potential meeting with people you don't want to see at all. Evan is fully committed to medicine, a noble endeavor, and he's been dedicated. Cardiology is one of the most challenging fields, but it's also one of the most promising. Starting a new patient was like walking through a minefield, but a mistake here cost the life not the doctor, but his ward. After all, more people die from heart and blood pressure problems than from armed conflicts. It wasn't just about saving lives. The cardiovascular system fascinated the doctor so much that he saw it as a model of the universe. Evan could talk for hours about how this organ is organized, why people suffocate, and how important it is to keep healthy. But his passion for medicine had a downside. At 35, he had nothing besides a dizzying career. No hobbies, no home, no wife, no children. Loneliness sometimes burdened, but there was no shortage of potential female admirers. The reason for loneliness and reluctance to return to his hometown are closely connected. His entire childhood was spent in the constant scandals of his mother and father. In the end, his father left, loudly slamming the door, which his mother has never forgiven him. Yes, Dad's temper was too difficult, but Mom wasn't exactly easygoing either. "So, Carlo," Evan said, filling small glasses with cognac. "Let's not drink too much, it's a lot of strain on the heart." "Come on," replied his colleague and former subordinate. "Once a week is fine." "Carlo, you're upsetting me," Evan said, deliberately serious. Cognac can be consumed only in small doses, savoring the noble drink. And monitor your blood pressure and liver function. It sounds like a toast. Carlo smiled and sipped from his glass. On the occasion of the transfer, Evan unsealed a bottle of rare and expensive cognac, which was given to him by a grateful patient. "I envy you," Evan sighed. "You have everything, and a wife, and a son, and a daughter. And most importantly, no ambition. You don't want to be the head of the department or the deputy chief physician. What's your secret?" "It's simple, Evan," Carlo answered. "Think about yourself. Think about yourself. Well, you'll make indicators to the ministry. You'll get the work done. You'll reduce the death rate. You can do it, Evan. I don't doubt it for a second. What's in it for you? You're just gonna hand your skills over to these frames. Your last name, your genes?" Carlo pointed to a wall hung with certificates of appreciation and diplomas. Certificates from the many courses Evan had attended crowded around it. If they were to be believed, there was simply no field in cardiology that didn't lend itself to a talented physician. "You're wrong," Evan said, filling his glasses. "I'm not doing all this for the ministry. I'm doing it for me. I'll get my dissertation and then I'll live. I'll get married." "I don't believe it." Carlo shook his head. "Why do you need a wife? You know how to do everything yourself. I think you could take out an appendix yourself, like the polar explorers, and without anesthesia." "Well, you're overdoing it here," waved his hand. "I'll have kids. I'll have kids. You need to choose a wife from pediatrics or nurses." They sat for 2 more hours, remembering cases from their rich medical practice. 3 years flew by like a day. Evan didn't stay anywhere for long because moving around was easy for him. If you don't have a home or family, it's easy to move. It's all about moving up and moving forward. The main thing he had learned from his father was to hold back against his will. There were so many times in his life when he wanted to say what he thought about the other person. To humiliate, to hurt, to ironize. But medicine teaches you to spare other people's feelings, reminding you every day that you don't last forever. Evan gave himself exactly 1 day for handoffs and packing. That should be enough time to carefully pack his certificates and commendations in one box and his things in another. The departure from the physical shell took longer. Lying on the cold ground, the free artist continued to feel the breath of the wind, and a bug bit his finger painfully. But the old man did not move and stubbornly waited for the transition to a new dimension, which he had been waiting for so long. As soon as the last of his strength left Oliver, an angel flew down to him. "Look, it's him. Walker," a girl's voice called out. "It's him." Oliver opened his eyes wide. No, it wasn't an angel, it was a girl. There was a boy with her, too, who was not quite as expressive. They were walking together in a strange city, as adventurers should. And judging by the fact that he had never seen this couple on the streets before, they were newcomers. Yes, the color and identity seekers sometimes wandered into their town. "Help," Oliver asked. "Help me sit down." "Are you really Walker?" The girl wouldn't stop. "I did a term paper on your painting." "Really?" nodded the artist. The guy sat him down and leaned him against the wall. "Drink." The girl obligingly held out a bottle of water, but Oliver shook his head negatively and pointed to the hand of the guy who was sipping a beer. "When you come to a foreign city, everything tastes better here, even this vulgar drink." The young man thought for a moment, but gave the bottle to the old man. He literally sucked on the neck and poured every last drop into himself. "Oliver, are you sick?" the girl asked. It turns out that not just rare tourists, but those who are interested in art, have wandered into their city, and in the nameless homeless man lying near the picturesque street, recognized the artist. "Should I call a doctor?" No, my soul," Oliver replied. He was pleased to be known and remembered. "Lying here, in the shadow of the street, I've been gauging perspective. I was looking for inspiration for my new paintings. You see," said the young man, addressing the angelic girl, who couldn't get past Walker himself. "I told you, it's just a bum lying around. And you, bad for the artist, bad for the artist." "Peter, what are you?" the girl hissed at him. "You're embarrassing me." "Do not pay attention, it's just a joke." These words were already addressed to a new acquaintance, which she had previously seen only on the pages of a rare catalogue of paintings. "It's nothing. Artists quickly get used to criticism," Oliver said, although Peter's words hurt him. "How did you recognize me, my soul?" "There is only one famous artist in this city," shrugged the girl. "Besides, I remembered that ring on my index finger right away." Oliver looked at his hand. Indeed, his talisman, his trademark, had accompanied him throughout his career, both during his rapid rise and during his endless fall. The red stone looked like a sapphire caught in the clutches "Of course," answered the artist without a shadow of embarrassment. A complete exclusive, the rise and fall of Oliver Walker. Interested? The naked eye could see that the guy did not like the idea very much, but he'd come from far away, come at random, so he was ready for adventure at heart. Peter had no idea why this bum in dirty clothes his girlfriend called an artist, but in order not to quarrel, he was ready to tolerate the society of a strange man, especially since he looked harmless. Oh, that deceptive appearance. "We could use a guide," he said peacefully. "And don't worry about a glass of wine. We can let you have a bottle." "Really, Leslie?" "I don't think artists drink," said the angelic-looking girl. "Isn't that right, Mr. Walker?" "It's true, Leslie," Oliver nodded. "I hate those alcoholic liquids. I have to take them solely to induce inspiration in my soul and to make peace with the imperfections of the world around me." Things are neatly folded and organized in drawers. Letters of gratitude and certificates disappeared from the walls as if they didn't exist at all. The former head physician looked absent-mindedly at the inventory and understood nothing at all. In fact, he contemplated the figures only to avoid giving the impression of an incompetent person. "The paperwork seems to be fine," Andrew stretched out. "Are you leaving already?" Christopher, the author and executor of the inventory, asked obligingly. Even a dozen Ingalls would not be enough to uncover all his machinations. Not even coffee. "No, thank you," replied the former chief physician. "And we will not convene the staff. Now we'll sign the documents, and that's it." The deputy chief physician was really upset. How will he live without this nice and completely talentless head? How will he pull off scams and receive public and invisible support? Now the former chief physician refused the farewell banquet, although he had every right to do so. He's understandable. "Why were you fired?" Christopher asked in an innocent voice. He knew the reason, of course. "Oh, Christopher, it's like in a marriage," Andrew replied seriously. "It's a bad temper." "But not with his wife." "Oh, Christopher," said the former head doctor. The words of the deputy, that he is now a nobody, somewhat hurt. But by and large, they were fair. "I think I'll rest for a while. You know, running an institution like this is hard work. Anything else you need me to sign?" Christopher was thinking about how wonderful it would be to run a hospital. There's still a lot of areas where a good businessman hasn't stepped foot. But there was one small barrier between him and being head of the hospital. Small but insurmountable, at least at this stage of Christopher's career. The tour of the city was a kilometre-long route from the hospital to Morbulus's cafe. And what else could Oliver show these young, uneducated tourists? Referring to the fact that they were going to have a long walk, the free artist offered to refresh themselves, but not to drink alcohol under any circumstances. Supposedly, it makes tourism lose its elitism. The cafe, Morbulus's, was located in the basement of an old building. There was a terrific atmosphere, for which the place was loved by both locals and guests. The good weather only enhanced the feeling of a wonderful mood. Nearby was a charming fountain with a boy and a goose, another attraction. "Can't we even have a glass of beer?" Peter asked in surprise. "Absolutely not," Oliver objected eagerly. "Although the Morbulus has its own brewery, that's no reason to confuse alcoholism with tourism." "Is it real?" Leslie asked incredulously. "Or do they just dilute the concentrate and refrigerate it?" "It's the real thing," said the artist. "I dedicated a cityscape to this marvelous equipment. Would you like to check?" Oliver suggested a seat on the terrace. The weather was glorious, and he hoped that his dirty clothes would not give off an unpleasant odor here and spoil the mood of his unexpected sponsors. They took the large table the artist had pointed out to them. He himself positioned himself so that the waiter would not notice him until the last. When Mickey, the cafe worker, approached, he immediately put his hands to his sides. "You got your listeners again?" he asked, looking at Oliver. "What do you think you're doing, young man?" The artist was indignant. "My new companions have traveled a long way to enjoy the beauty of this city. I demand that their order be fulfilled as a matter of priority." "Who's paying?" Mickey asked unceremoniously. "We are paying," replied Peter with a smile. He must have misunderstood the waiter's aggression and thought it was some kind of elaborate game. Mr. Walker said that they serve excellent beer here. We'd like to try the freshest. Yes, bring 3 glasses of dark and 3 of light, Leslie asked. Oh wait, you'll drink to meeting us too, won't you, Oliver? Well, the artist drummed his fingers on the table. Only if you insist. But then I'd ask for more wings. These wings are great. So the waiter summarized. 3 glasses of light, 3 glasses of dark and wings. 3 servings, Peter said. We can put down a deposit. That won't be necessary, Mickey smiled. Right away. I hope you know what you're doing, young people. Oliver really found an appreciative audience. A boy and a girl listened to his stories about how masterpieces were created. Anticipating a brilliant drink, he immediately became a goldsmith. The planning horizon of a beggar is narrowed down to one day, and if the future in this perspective is rosy, then you can relax. The day dissolved imperceptibly in the rays of sunset, and beer as smoothly passed into fortified wine. The tourists were quite tipsy, but the free artist could not boast of sobriety either. At such moments, he forgot that he had long ago lost his studio, lost his brushes and paints, and slipped to the bottom of life. He was awakening in him the very artist who, thanks to the efforts of unknown authors, got into the anthologies of creativity. So when are we going? Leslie asked. To see the city? I could use a stretch. You didn't stretch enough, my soul. The artist asked me sympathetically. Waiter. No, I've had enough alcohol. The girl waved her hands. I'm not even sure I can go. The incomparable Leslie. The hop unleashed Oliver not only his tongue, but also his sinful thoughts. Have you ever done any modeling? No, smiled the girl. Why, am I suitable? Of course. The artist said eagerly. You can write anything, even an angel or a femme fatale. There are such universal types that... And Oliver went into a long story about how many models he'd had in his life. Leslie's cheeks reddened from the savory details, and Peter's fists grew leaden. He watched with anger as the low-down bum picked on his girlfriend right in front of his eyes, and she didn't seem to mind the attention. Listen, Mr. Nemtsov. Finally, Peter said. Walker, corrected the artist and smiled disgustedly. Never mind. I think you've had enough to drink, and we've had enough of your drunken company. And you're not a very good guide either. The guy's diction, despite the amount of alcohol he drank, was clear. He only began to pull the vowels, as if he was trying to speak in a chant. The fact that the artist was intoxicated was evident only by his sly eyes and increasingly swaggering behavior. So, listen to me, said Oliver, finishing his 3rd bottle of fortified wine. You're a good-looking, handsome man, but you don't even know how to live. Me? Peter asked again. He had had less to drink, but he had not had much experience in this business either. And this old man, who was only trying to humiliate him, was getting on his nerves. Do you think that if Leslie had a choice, she would be with you, a man stupid and uncreative? Would she have been with you? No, she'd leave. She'd go to an artist for emotion, for feeling. To someone who could give her not a new phone, but a storm of unrivaled feelings, immortalize her beauty on canvases, and that was the last straw. While Oliver continued his denunciation, the young man stood up, grabbed the artist, and threw him into the fountain with the chair. In flight, the artist experienced a feeling of lightness and longing. It was as if it was happening not to him, but to another person, and not in reality, but in a dream. After the splash of water on the terrace, there was a sepulchral silence. It was broken by Mickey's applause. Brilliant, said the waiter. The establishment will gladly give you a discount of 20% off the final check. It seemed to Paul that Oliver had gone to the bottom and was not coming out. Several customers ran up to the fountain to help the unfortunate man. Leslie seemed ready to fall through the ground from shame and embarrassment. Evan looked around the office to see if he'd forgotten anything important. It looked like he'd taken everything, Thanks to this madhouse, let's go to another one. For several years, he had been working as the head of the cardiology department, angry at someone, hoping for something, and now he was going to conquer a new peak. Evan was sure that one day he would be able to change the medical system so that it would turn to the patient, and along with the bureaucratic grin, it showed a nice, neat smile. "So that's how we're leaving," he heard a familiar voice behind him. "So we're saying goodbye, huh? Well, it's not like I'm a patient. I don't necessarily need to be treated humanely or humanized." Evan turned around. Victoria stood on the doorstep, the most talented nurse of the department, and also his favorite. She was an incredibly beautiful girl, with a chiseled figure and a charming face, but a sharp tongue. For the past 2 years, they only pretended not to meet and do not love each other. Rumors about their relationship circulated in the hospital, but Young and Happy denied them. "We're not saying goodbye," Evan smiled. "Am I moving to another planet? I'll be 100 kilometers away from you. Do you know how often we'll see each other? Once a month, at least." Victoria chuckled to make another barb, but suddenly cried. Cardiologist inwardly was ready for any claims, jealousy, shouting, but not for tears. This female weapon instantly forced him to declare surrender. And now he, initially ready to clarify relations, suddenly softened instantly. And he began to think how to calm the favorite, and at the same time to explain to her that the final separation is not in his plans. "Victoria, come on," he said. "I wanted to leave without saying goodbye." "You're a fool, Evan," replied the girl. "You're a PhD in English, but you're a fool. To leave in English, you have to be an Englishman, and you, my cosmopolitan, can leave only foolishly." Vuka had recently turned 25, and all the nurses she had started working with after college had either gone off to study to be doctors or had jumped out and gotten married and gone on maternity leave. But who were they getting? Drivers, laborers, managers at most. Victoria wanted a prince. The only one available was Evan, who was more like a king in exile, an eternal wanderer, prevented from ascending to the throne by his enemies. "Victoria, come on," the cardiologist said again. "You and I are not saying goodbye. I believe in long-distance relationships." "Really?" asked the girl, "and I do not believe. Do you know how many proposals I've had? Marriage?" Evan was surprised. "I thought we were dating." "You're a fool, Evan," shouted the nurse. "Job offers. I'd had all kinds of job offers. Head nurse, private clinic. You're the only reason I've stuck around. I'm waiting for you to make me happy." Evan had to admit that she was right. It was high time for him to settle down, to have a family and children. They managed to hide their relationship even from their friend Grishka. That, by the way, is not very upset about the departure of a comrade. After all, not somewhere there is going, and on the promotion. "I'm sorry, Victoria," Evan exhaled. "I guess I'm just not ready. I'm just not ready yet, that's all." "For what?" "Well, for my family," the cardiologist replied. "If my kid gets sick, and you know what I'm like, I'll call a concilium. We'll discuss all the stuff snot or, God forbid, upset stomach." "Silly, silly Evan," Victoria said, but in a calm voice. She took her man's hand. "We just have to try to do things the way people do." "How?" Evan asked. "I asked you to keep our relationship private so you wouldn't get strangled here. Do you know how hard it is for a husband and wife to be in the same team?" "I could handle that," Victoria replied defiantly. "Or haven't you seen how strong I am? I mean something else. You could have introduced me to your parents, rented an apartment together. You know, in the dormitory, there are no romantic meetings. Are you really that desperate for money for me?" Evan felt embarrassed. Even though he held a respectable position, he still lived in the dormitory as a lab technician. Except that they gave him a separate room, but the doctor did nothing to make it cozy. He didn't even hang a curtain on the window. Victoria lived a floor above, and she had to master the wonders of spy science so that no one would see their meeting, and he didn't provide her with any romance. If he gave her flowers, it was once a year, not more often. He never took her to the sea. True, always helped financially, but money is just a piece of paper, not feelings. It became a discovery for him that his Vicky, whom he shamelessly used for the last 2 years, also has a soul, and he seemed to have spit in that soul. Introduce her to his parents, Evan sighed, trying to change the subject and push the unpleasant feelings away. Alas, that's impossible. My parents, you know. And the cardiologist made a vague gesture, which could be interpreted in 2 ways if desired. Either absent in principle, or flew to another planet. Evan was ready to support any version, as long as he didn't tell the truth. But you have parents, Victoria shouted impatiently. I saw the lens. And they live in the same city where you go to work. You expect me to believe in such coincidences? Did you look at my documents? The cardiologist asked. Of course, replied the nurse. I need to know if you're divorced, if you pay alimony. Oh, come on. You understand. My parents are. How can I put it delicately? Well, you're not gonna like it. You got a woman in there. Victoria hissed angrily. Maybe your true love is out there waiting for you. And I'm just a substitute brigade for an urgent need. No, what are you? Said the doctor. Victoria, I realize how I look from the outside. And I realize I'm being a pig too. But you and I are adults. Can't we just? Evan, stop it. The nurse interrupted him, impatient. I believe you, but let's make a deal. If you're leaving for good. And don't call me, and don't write, and don't ask for anything. I'll never give you anything else, not one cell of my body. And I swear I'll marry the first tractor driver or combine harvester I see, whoever calls. Evan sighed. Victoria was really good for him. She not only knew her worth, she had it. And he treated her wrong, looked down on her. He used her love like he was taking raisins out of a bun. Everything tasty in his mouth and the rest on the floor. That's not right. But why didn't you think of that before? Victoria, he asked. Give me a week. How about this? 1 week from now, and everything will come to a head. Either I propose to you, or we go our separate ways. Okay? The girl was silent, wondering what to say. There was a whole range of feelings on her face. She must have been trying to understand why she was wasting her time with this good but indecisive man. So, while the operation is going on and seconds count, he can make the right decision quickly. But if the question is about his personal life, he needs weeks, months, years. The answer to the indecisive suitor was forming in her mouth. You know what, Evan? The flight into the fountain was unpleasant, but it was sobering. The cold fall air was invigorating. Oliver thought that he'd really behaved inappropriately. But that thought existed in his head, without any remorse or desire to make amends. It was already done, so why worry about it? Thank you, he said to Peter, who approached the bum. Indeed, my closet should have been washed a long time ago. If you come near my girlfriend again, you hear me? Threatened the guy. I'll have you. Come on, Peter, come on. Leslie ran up to him. Oliver, I'm so embarrassed. It's okay. I deserve it. The artist smiled. He again wanted to make an offer to work for him as a model, but changed his mind, looking at the young competitor. Very, very glad to meet you. Young people, come to our city again. A murmur reigned in the cafe. The second waiter put a tray with 2 bottles of wine and rushed somewhere inside into the bottles. He was probably going to call Thomas to have Oliver detained and brought to the station, but such a prospect was not in the plans of the free artist. He thought that any situation, even the most unenviable, could be capitalized on. Besides, Oliver had a more pressing problem. He needed to dry his clothes before night fell. Of course, it wasn't as cold as December or January. but catching pneumonia was a real possibility. Fortunately, he already had a plan of action for such an eventuality. Getting out of the fountain, he slowly strolled away, and while the attention of all the visitors was drawn to the young hero who had sent him into the swim, Oliver nimbly stole 2 bottles of fortified wine left by the waiter and hid them in his coat. He walked out of the cafe with a victorious gait, waving goodbye to the woman at the table. Oliver moved a safe distance away, fearing not so much exposure as freezing. A plan to escape a cold death had already matured in his mind. Across the street from the cafe was a park that had recently been landscaped. They had put benches, gazebos, playgrounds for children, and most importantly, braziers where you could build a fire and use it to dry things. Oliver was lucky. Someone had recently roasted meat and left warm coals. The artist threw some brushwood he had gathered nearby and began to fan the flames. There was something philosophical in it, something eternal. It is true what they say, you can look at the fire endlessly. When the branches were burning, he put a couple of logs to them, as if they had been left there for him. When he was warm enough, Oliver found a large bough, pressed it into the ground, and hung up his coat to dry. He put his boots and socks on the edge of the brazier, away from the flames. He buried his feet in the sand mixed with ashes and sat down on a log. So he spent 2 hours warming himself by the flame and sipping wine from a bottle. The blissful warmth spread both outside and inside his body. Soon all problems began to recede to the periphery of his consciousness. Also, a great idea popped into his head. Who said he couldn't go to the hospital? When it gets dark, he'll climb in through the window. He'll pick any room, lie down in an empty bed and tell the patients. Do they have every single person in there accounted for? When it was finally dark and Oliver was dead drunk, he began his difficult journey to the medical center. It was not only the darkness, which was at least diluted by the streetlights, but also the native soil. It was trying to jump up and hit him in the face. He had to put his hands out so as not to scratch his nose. Finally, the hospital buildings appeared. The free artist, although he did not consider himself an old man, was no longer suitable for acrobatic feats. Conquering the fence seemed to him like climbing a mountain peak. He urgently needed an open window to get inside. Even the second floor was an insurmountable obstacle, but he was lucky. Someone had left a window open in the hospital annex, right near the main entrance, just where the guard and some other character had taken him today. It was at this point that the elevation went down, so it was possible to get to the open window without too much labor. The free artist was jubilant once inside. In the pitch darkness, he felt how drunk he was. There was a sepulchral silence in the ward. The patients were barely breathing, and Oliver sneaked around so as not to wake them. In the darkness, he felt the bed and groped for it. It was small, narrow, and the bureaucrats were saving money on everything. There was no blanket, and the pillow was small and ridiculous. This one was definitely unoccupied. Oliver crawled onto the crib, covered himself with a sheet, and fell into a dead sleep. It was comfortable, soft, warm, and peaceful. For some reason, the bed had soft sides, but the intoxicated mind of the free artist did not pay any attention to it. The arrival of the artist did not wake anyone, although he was making a lot of noise. I wonder why. Helga couldn't help herself from the happy news. Her son was returning to the city. Not just anyone, but the head doctor of the local hospital. She couldn't believe her happiness, that such a negligent father could have such a wonderful offspring. Ivan didn't spoil her with visits, but he didn't disappoint her with calls. Yesterday, he called and said, as if nothing had happened, "I'm coming home as a chief physician," that he would write a dissertation, and in general is going to reach for the stars. Helga was over the moon. She would have to bring home her old fool, and then life's journey could be considered a success. Of course, she could quite easily spend the rest of her days alone, but she felt it was her son, Not her, who needed the reunion now. I could see why Evan had a grudge against her, that she could not keep Oliver, did not want to put up with his lifestyle and harsh words. And even though the artist had left her 10 years ago, she's still worried about him. Worried. After all, 2 children on their feet. Where can I find him, that bastard? Vance, do you copy? Helga called a man who's got Oliver on his cell phone. I hear you, he answered. His voice was deliberately gruff, but Vance was a good man. A good man. Did you recognize him? The woman asked. Of course I recognized him, said the man. What? Are you calling to wish me happy birthday, friend? It was already in August, but better late than never. Oh, sorry, Vance, said Helga. That's not why I'm calling. Listen, I'm looking for my Oliver. Have you seen him? Of course I have. Vance's voice suddenly became rougher. He came by my place the other day, you bum. He told me he loved me, but his words, old girl, are not worth the air they're thrown into. I take it you didn't accept him. You didn't believe his words. No. The person I'm talking to answered. Listen, I work hard. My eyes can't see anything anymore. I can barely hold this brush. And him. Sleeping in ditches, drinking bitter in buckets like a cucumber. He walked 5 kilometers to me without even panting. Does he look good? Helga asked. She knew the answer to that question. With Oliver's health, even street life couldn't do him much harm. Excellent. Vance confirmed her guess. Listen, I got a call from a fellow from Morculus. He was relaxing there on the terrace. He saw such a thing. Helga thought for a moment, what are we talking about? And then she remembered the very place where she had tried her first cocktails when she was very young. Is this place still in demand among the public? Oh, it's a cafe? The woman was surprised. Wow, are they still in business? Of course, replied Vance. And you do not go out of the house at all? Oh, I go out, Vance. I go out. So what happened there in this cafe that? Oh, that's right. This dummy of ours found some kids, kissed them off, and one of them almost drowned him in the fountain. He held him underwater for 3 minutes. Can you believe it? Everything bubbled up. They wanted to call the police, but he got away unharmed. Helga waved her hand. Vance always liked to embellish. Tell you what, Vance, if you see mine, tell him I was looking for him. I don't feel well. I'm going to die. Just say so. What, old woman, is it true? Asked the interlocutor. You do not dare be that, do you understand? I'll think about it. Helga replied and hung up. Every change for the worse, Christopher thought, sitting in his cozy office. The leather armchair perfectly fit his generally slender figure. In the corner stood an expensive electric kettle with a built-in filter, coffee maker, humidifier and other gifts from grateful contractors. If he suddenly wanted to rest, you can lie on the leather sofa, another surprise he received after the renovation of the entryway. But there's no time to rest for Christopher. On the door is a proud, gold-embossed plaque. Deputy Chief Physician for Housekeeping. It's a work of art. The printing is even, and there's not a blemish or dot on the surface. The most beautiful plaque in the country. Christopher was sure that even the Minister of Health himself had a worse seal. He made himself, and at the same time renovated the hospital, the buildings, and the surrounding area. Alas, the available space for repair and improvement in the hospital was running out. The money was running out, and Christopher still had to renew his car and send his son to language courses abroad. He'd have to make do. When he was appointed Deputy Chief Physician, the detractors laughed. Christopher doesn't even have a medical degree. You're not a doctor. Said one of his enemies, you're the storekeeper. Who gave you the right to be called Deputy Chief Physician? Christopher reacted coldly to such attacks, answering with restraint. With his detractors, he gradually sorted out, because the head cooks always have long and clean hands. Indeed, is it a joke that a man who is not directly related to medicine became Deputy Chief Physician? Christopher would answer this question in blocks. First, You have to convince everyone of your indispensability. Secondly, at all levels to create confidence that without the position of deputy chief physician in the hospital cannot do without. Thirdly, to hold on to the position tenaciously from the last strength, and then all personnel storms will pass by. The previous chief physician took little interest in the affairs of the hospital, preferring to sit in his own office. For the last year, he had not been involved in any matters at all, leaving everything to his deputies. But Christopher was always in the thick of things, making the most of them. Like today, for instance. He saw that homeless man and brilliantly impersonated a doctor to get rid of him. He acted in such a way that not a single coin in the whole hospital and in the neighborhood could not fall silently for the deputy chief physician on the economic part. His special pride was the ritual store. Christopher rented out the premises on which it had grown up for an incredible profit. Not for the hospital, of course, but for himself. The paperwork said it was supposed to be something else. What it was, he couldn't remember. Every day, inconsolable relatives came to the funeral store to say goodbye. The trade in wreaths, lamps, ribbons, and crosses flourished. Of course, the view of the memorial paraphernalia from the main entrance to the hospital was not always to the liking of patients and visitors, especially when a hearse was parked in the parking lot. But to the disgruntled, Christopher always responded philosophically. "Memento mori," said the deputy chief physician. "Remember death. We all came out of the ashes, and it's only a matter of time before we return to the ashes." Speaking of ashes, he managed to get the hospital to buy the most expensive urns in the country. Unfortunately, there was a flaw. The waste garbage cans were too sturdy and had not been written off for 4 years. It was impossible to break them. He used to renew them every year or even more often. Christopher didn't rule out the possibility that he might have to sabotage the incredibly sturdy garbage cans and buy new ones. Everything was going fine before, but now there was a new challenge. A young, very green head doctor of only 35 years old is sent to the hospital, and what Christopher had heard about him did not inspire optimism. A fanatical, totally dedicated doctor. Most likely, he would not tolerate any kind of machinations and violations. On the contrary, he would stick his long nose into Christopher's finances, or, God forbid, force him to share. The day before, on Thursday, the deputy chief physician came to one of the medical buildings, where repair work was in full swing. According to the documents, they should have been finished 2 months ago. But the builders, who were hired by a clever contractor, were working very slowly. And after all, the certificates of completed work were signed long ago. The money was transferred. The previous head doctor did not get into such issues, but it is unlikely that his successor will be as malleable. "Move it, you bastards!" Christopher shouted, watching the workers. "Move, or I'll leave you penniless." But the foreman's words had no effect whatsoever. Finishers lazily wandered around the room and worked at a snail's pace. It was the kind of hopelessness and doom that slaves in ancient Rome must have worked with. Alas, Christopher was not a patrician, and therefore could not influence the slave laborers with the methods he had in mind. The chamberlain tried to calm down and pull himself together. In principle, if you work day and night, tirelessly, then by Monday it is quite realistic to finish. On Friday, the new head physician, most likely, will not delve so deeply into the affairs of the hospital. Besides, he had prepared a great program for him. Restaurant, billiards, sauna. "Come on, come on," Christopher shouted, dialing the contractor. The phone was unavailable. "Why are you shouting, father?" The builder, who smelled of wine, asked him. "There's no need to yell at us. We are experienced people." A smart man said, "If you do badly and quickly, the speed will be forgotten, but the quality will be remembered. And good deeds, as usual, are not done quickly." "Can you do a good job?" Christopher challenged. "You just do it for me, no matter how." It's better to take your time with bad things too, Father, or what happens? If you do bad things, that'll be accepted late. That's what I'm telling you. No, I couldn't argue with those bastards. That's what. Very glad to meet you, the man said. My name is Christopher, and I'm your first deputy. Let's talk like this, simply. Evan Christopher. No barriers, no limits. Just keep it simple. Keep it right. What do you say? Something about this man seemed familiar to Evan. The voice, I think, and the sweater. Where had he seen him before? Maybe at a reception. Right, this is the same guy from the video he saw this morning. Not a lot of views, of course, but still. The chief medical director pulled his cell phone out of his pocket. The link was saved. Hello, Christopher, Evan said. I'm the new chief physician. I wonder where I've seen you before. And then I answered on the internet. Look, aren't you in this video? He turned on his phone and showed it to his deputy. But he wasn't embarrassed for a second. Putting the same trademark smile on his face, he said without hesitation, You see how well we're doing. We cured him. Cured who? The head doctor was surprised. You know who, the patient. Here. Did not go a little bit to the emergency room, so we moved. Do not pay attention, do not worry. Do you know what happened to him? Evan asked. Of course, Christopher replied. He's fine. We carried him a little bit. He got up and walked away. What's this man's name? So I can verify the information. Noma's Oliver. The deputy started tapping his fingers thoughtfully. Nemtsov. Walker. Evan, what's wrong? Are you not feeling well? Oliver woke up with a terrible headache. It was like his life energy had been drained out of him and his body was filled with lead. He couldn't move. And most importantly, he couldn't understand where he was or how he had gotten here. The free artist was lying on his side in a semi-dark room. Everything in front of his eyes was red, as if a tasteless curtain had been thrown in front of him. Only his left arm moved faintly, the rest of his body stiff from the forced pose. Yesterday came back in fragments that appeared before his mind's eye, as if in a kaleidoscope. Here he was being kicked out by Vance. Here he asks to be put in the hospital. Then, as in the good old days, he drinks at Morbilus's and bathes in the fountain. And he seems to be going to the public garden. How did he end up here? When he heard voices, Oliver hurried to cover himself with a sheet. He rolled over onto his back, closed his eyes, and held his breath. You can't do that. The first voice spoke loudly. You can't do that. Look, if it's about this bum, and God with him, who cares about him? Me, I'm interested, answered the first one. You are ex officio deputy chief physician. Yes, ex officio, said the second voice. But in fact, I have a technical degree. Technical. And I'm telling you, you can't do that. The man shouted in a rage. You can't sell funeral paraphernalia outside the main building of the hospital. For God's sake. A second voice contradicted him. That's a lot of money. We should have opened a canteen here, objected the first voice. A pharmacy, anything. But not a ritual store. By the way, where did you get the keys? Christopher blurted out. First, the new head doctor showed him a creepy video of him and a guard dragging Oliver. And then he gave him a hard time about the funeral parlor. And the workday hadn't even officially started yet. But then Christopher went crazy and opened the door to the store with his own key. What are we gonna do? We have to find a way out of this. Why shouldn't I have a key? I asked him in a subservient manner. I'm the storekeeper. I go around checking things out. What if there's something wrong? What if you get caught short? Evan countered. The hospital would have to pay for it. You're the hired help. The previous day came back to Oliver's mind. The keywords: hospital, doctor, ritual hall. How he, sneaking around in the dark, had decided to get into the room. Where he wondered, had he gotten to? Evan, let's not get facetious, Christopher said. Yes, the funeral parlor is not a pleasant sight for some of the more impressionable people. But look at the order inside. What cleanliness! The head doctor had a different opinion. He could smell a subtle but unpleasant odor, which is something people might give off if they're awake. Really? See how neat it is here. Christopher kept pushing. Wreaths to one side, ribbons in another, crosses in a third, coffins. Yeah, let's talk about coffins, Evan agreed. Does this coffin personally? Doesn't raise any questions. Lying under the sheet, Oliver began to shiver. The voices grew louder and the footsteps closer. He thought about taking off his veil, jumping up and running away. But his stiff body would hardly approve of such a dynamic. Can you see? Evan asked. Oh, for crying out loud, there's a dead body in here. It's in the coffin, not in the refrigerator. Christopher's eyes widened. Indeed, in one of the coffins, under the sheet, the outline of a man was clearly visible. The only nuance was that the arms lay unnaturally on his chest, as if they had been placed carelessly. Overcome with fear, Christopher lowered the sheet. His eyes darkened. In the coffin lay the homeless man they had carried around the corner of the hospital yesterday. Good God, the deputy whispered, crossing himself. God forgive me, God forgive me, God forgive me. Father! Evan shouted, running up to the coffin. Father! Christopher sobbed. He felt sorry for everyone. The poor bum whose heart attack yesterday he'd mistaken for a talent act. The new head doctor, who was starting work with such a tragic incident. But most of all himself, because it is he, Christopher, who will be held responsible for what happened. And it looks like it's going to be more than just a dismissal. Investigators from the capital will come here. They will dig, and they will find every penny that leaked past the state treasury. Ahem. Suddenly the corpse coughed and opened his eyes. Oh, Evan, it's been years. Did you forget about your file? In the ensuing silence, a noise was heard as the Deputy Chief Physician for Economic Affairs collapsed to the floor. Evan slapped Christopher's cheeks, trying to bring him to his senses. The Deputy Chief opened his eyes. It's a good thing there's carpeting everywhere, he whispered. I'd have gotten hurt. The homeless guy was waddling around, warming up. How could he be Evan's father? Well, life happens, Christopher thought. Sometimes the most disgusting parents have great kids. But more often than not, it's the other way around. Are you awake? The doctor in charge asked. I want a written explanation. Today. With these words, Evan headed for the exit. He had a hard job ahead of him. If he was met with such a mess at the entrance to the hospital, what would happen next? He had not yet touched the medication, the quality of the treatment, and other aspects that made up the success of the treatment. Evan walked with a steady stride, followed by Christopher, who had come to his senses. Oliver, exhausted from last night's drunkenness, was trailing behind him. He was thirsty, and he was leaning against the faucet of the cooler in the ritual store, behind his son. The Deputy Chief Physician was in such a hurry that he'd forgotten to lock the door. Evan, shouted Christopher as they passed through the lobby of the main building. I can explain everything, I swear. I don't doubt it for a second, the head doctor replied. Both explain and answer. People began to stare at them. Evan felt awkward, realizing that his new staff was getting to know him here and now in a less than ideal environment. But he was not going to change his mind. Dear colleagues, he addressed those who were looking at him and Christopher. I'm sorry we're meeting in such a difficult environment, but we don't have time to dawdle. We have a lot of work to do. Let's get to work. The little speech seemed to make a good impression on the staff. Evan caught a few appreciative glances and smiles and nodded to each one, then froze in indecision, wondering what to do next. Heaven, for a word, a familiar voice sounded behind the newly minted head doctor's back. Victoria, said Evan, turning around. You're the last thing I needed. Evan, I'm not waiting, the girl replied. You'll give me a few minutes right now, or I'll leave you forever. Christopher rubbed his hands together. This was his salvation. Now, according to the situation, he would either organize a private meeting between them or, no, the chief was definitely not going to kick her out. Zaphos decided to take full control of the situation. Yes, don't kick the girl out. He said, come on, I'll show you your new office. You can talk to me. Here, look. This is Frank, our senior security guard. Frank, stay awake. He ran briskly up to the second floor of the main building, taking wide strides. He occasionally looked over his shoulder and made a hand gesture that said, catch up, catch up, catch up. Evan sighed and followed, taking Victoria under his elbow. Victoria, it's nothing personal, the chief said. It's all gone to shit here. That's fine, the nurse smiled. It's about time we got things in order, and I know how. As he passed the guard, Evan beckoned to him. Frank, a word. Oliver couldn't believe his eyes and ears for a long time. This was how his son had grown, not only in height, but also professionally. He's an entire head doctor. Now, probably, it will be possible to go to the hospital as a free hotel and canteen. Now, no one will dare to kick him out on the street and talk to him disrespectfully. And the guard, he can even pull his ears, and nothing will happen to him for this. True, when the free artist was distracted, just for a second. This nimble little man took his son away under his arm with some girl. No problem. We just need to find his office. He is the head doctor. Let the registrar try to stop him. She's the worse for it. Good jobs are hard to find in the city these days. I've done a lot for him, Oliver reasoned aloud. First of all, I brought him into the world. Secondly, I gave him a wonderful dog when he was 3. My wife didn't want him to have one, but who asked her? When my son was 6, I painted a portrait. What else did I do for him? I gave him a name, patronymic, and surname, of course. It wasn't much, but in Oliver's mind, he considered any indulgence to any man to be the highest gratitude on his part. So he was convinced that Evan would not refuse him help, especially since it was winter and there was nowhere to go. He could go to breakfast in the morning and then to the city, to his favorite pubs and friends, and let them try to keep him out. Freeze. Oliver was brought out of his thoughts by a guard. He literally blocked the road, and the homeless man collided with him with all his might. That's when the power of his opponent was revealed. The guard didn't even stagger, but the artist collapsed to the ground. Hey, big guy, Oliver snapped at him. Get out of the way. This is a secure facility, the guard smiled. You can't come in and out of here as you please. Yes, you can, replied the artist. If your son is the head doctor. Who's that, Evan? The guard asked incredulously. That's your idea. That's a cross, Oliver said with heat. My dear son, it's been 10 years. Evan was under strict orders not to let you in, the guard explained. But I wouldn't have let you in anyway. Get out of here, or I'll call Thomas. To tell you the truth, I should have done that yesterday. No, the guard is definitely lying. There's no way his son, his own flesh and blood, would order his own father off the premises. The officer was definitely cheating. But how do we outsmart this lump? We must get inside by all means and talk to my son face to face. Okay, Oliver smiled. I'll do it. Can I use the restroom? To the bathroom? The guard asked and scratched his head. There were no orders from the chief physician, and to refuse such a request to a beggar is not Christian. Come on, I'll walk you out. As they passed the staircase, Oliver, with an unprecedented impetuosity for his age, suddenly darted away and ran upstairs. The guard shouted after him, but he couldn't move at the same speed. He could not move at the same speed. Here's your office, Chief, Christopher said. Simple but tasteful. In need of repair, of course. The office really didn't make the best impression. A shabby desk, a chair with a broken lift mechanism, a sofa on 3 legs. The walls were peeling and the doorknob was wobbly. Nothing in the world is random though. Christopher had deliberately chosen this particular office so that the new head of the department would ask him to tidy it up. The deputy would demonstrate his own indispensability and efficiency. Good, Evan said. He was unimpressed by this environment. Leave us alone. What about? Christopher began to wail. He was waiting for instructions to clean up the office. All right, go, Evan demanded. We'll deal with you later. The deputy walked out the door, puzzled. Say how messy it is, Evan said. What I have to work with here? You won't believe what happened. Evan, I've been thinking, Victoria said with a touch of solemnity. Marry me. With these words, she got down on one knee, took a box out of her pocket and opened it. Inside were a pair of charming cufflinks. Victoria, get up immediately. The head doctor demanded. What kind of joke is this? What kind of jokes? The girl questioned. You don't ask me to marry you, so I decided to ask you myself. Well, say yes or no. The door swung open. Oliver stood on the threshold, and a few seconds later the guard ran up. Son, shouted the artist. Son, that's how you are with your father, isn't it? Evan, I'm sorry. The guard shouted over him. That old rascal has escaped. Overtaken. The head doctor was silent. Then he looked at Victoria, who continued to kneel, and said, You wanted to meet my father. Evan pointed at the dirty bum. Meet Oliver Walker. After, the girl said impatiently. I was asking you a question. I agree, Victoria. I'm in. Only on one condition. You'll work here with me. Okay.